Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Bert Hofman. I'm the director of the East Asian Institute, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this very interesting seminar on South Korea's soft power and its foreign policies in the ASEAN region, which is organized by the East Asian Institute's Korea Center. And if you don't know the person yet who's leading that, that is Dr. Lampeng R. Today we are going to talk about what I think is a very interesting topic. I can tell you my wife is a filmmaker, so she is in awe of what Korea has achieved over the past 25, 30 years in terms of creative industries. And as a result, the soft power of Korea as a nation has greatly improved, especially in Asia, but now increasingly around the world. And very appropriately, today we started with a huge downpour, and it means that some people are going to be delayed. But if you recall, the first Academy Award winner from Korea was Parasite, and the moment supreme of the movie is actually a massive downpour. So that is all quite appropriate to emphasize the Korean soft power here. For us, we have a great partnership with the Korean Embassy, and thank you so much for your support, but also the Korea Foundation is supporting the Korea Center at the East Asian Institute, and I'm very grateful for that. The purpose of today is to really discuss what soft power means for diplomacy, and from all kinds of angles, of course from the Korean angle, and I'm very curious to see how Korea is using soft power or not as a tool in diplomacy. But we have a lot of experts from around ASEAN and other countries to give the perspective on how they see the soft power of Korea work out in diplomacy. And I believe that soft power is going to be one of the defining powers, if not the defining powers of this of the 21st century. We have hard power, we have sharp power, but soft power in the end, in my view, is the most important tool, and it's the most beneficial tool for the world because it doesn't hurt anybody. It just gives joy and spreads understanding of culture and understanding of nations. And so I wish every country the soft power that Korea has at this moment. With those words, I would like to hand over to Ambassador Choi Hoon to give his welcoming word. Just a very brief introduction. I won't read out all his CV or his bio that you can find in the program. There's more programs over there. But Ambassador Choi Hoon is, of course, the ambassador here in Korea. He was the standing commissioner of the Financial Services Commission. And before that, he has a long career in the Ministry of Finance. So I'm an economist and worked in the World Bank, so we have a very strong affiliation. He was also, as one of his stints, he served as the Director General for the Greater Two-Men Initiative. And for those of you who do not know that, that's a very important initiative between China, Korea, Russia, and North Korea to think about joint development of, it's maybe a little dormant now, but it is not gone, and it may play a very important role. As I said, we've had a very important partnership with the Korean Embassy, and Ambassador Choi has played a leading role in that, and I thank you very much for that. Ambassador Choi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bert. So very wonderful introduction to me, because I'm impressed. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning. So heavy downpour, so makes our seminars a little bit late. Welcome to the seminar on the South Korea soft power and its foreign policies in the ASEAN region. Let me begin by expressing my congratulations on the opening of today's seminar, which is part of an exciting lineup of events for Korea Week 2022. Korea Weeks, comprising various events integrated into a single annual festival, is being held for the first time this year. And I'm grateful to have the Korea Center be part of this momentous occasion by hosting today's seminar in partnership with the Korean Embassy. I'd like to extend my appreciation to Professor Bert Hofman, Director of East Asia Institute, Dr. Kim Taehwan, maybe he's online, he's Professor of Public Diplomacy at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy, Dr. Lam Peng-eul, the head of Korea Center, and all other panelists for affording their precious time to join us today. Today's topic is soft power, so I'm not quite familiar with the concept of the soft power. We just recognize the concept is in general terms. But what is the soft power? It's just the opposite of the hard power. So in the 70s and 80s, the US and the Soviet Russia, they have confronted with a hard power. But in general, soft power can be defined as the power of winning hearts and mind. It maybe comes from the US academia when in 1970s, in the occasion of the Vietnam's war and anti-war movement, as far as I understand. But in light of the recent growing geopolitical rivalries and tensions, some may raise questions as about the relevance of soft power. While soft power may seemingly appear less effective than hard power, but I think it is important not to discount the significance and impact of the soft power. We can see that in recent Russia-Ukraine conflict, President Zelensky has impressively rallied the international community support, particularly through social media, in their fight against Russia, directly appealing to the public using soft tools has helped to secure their moral legitimacy and boost the morale of its relatively weak military forces. Needless to say, they are getting broader support from the international community. The charm and popularity of Korean pop culture are known globally. The so-called Hallyu, or the Korean wave, seems stronger in Asia, where countries share many similarities in culture and tradition. In a survey conducted by ICS last year for Southeast Asian people, 8.5% of survey participants selected Korea as their favorite holiday destination, which is up from 4.7% the previous year. I can say that Korea's soft power has contributed to the deep solidarity and closeness between Korea and the ASEAN countries. Riding on this momentum, the Korean government will continue strengthening its partnership with the ASEAN under the vision of global pivotal state. We recognize ASEAN as a critical partner in advancing freedom, peace, and prosperity in the Pacific region. So we therefore will solidify a mutually beneficial partnership with ASEAN in various fields, including culture, human resources, and digitalization. Soft power helps conduct foreign policy because it creates a favorable environment for learning it. At the same time, foreign policy should carefully deploy soft power to win and retain the hearts of the ASEAN people. And I'm confident that today's seminar to come up with an insight and policy advice on maintaining the positive influence of soft power on Korea's foreign policy. I wish all the best success in today's discussion. Thank you.
Well, I see that more and more have made it through the rain. I'm very, very pleased to see that. And I'm also very pleased to see that we have on the screen Professor Kim Taehwan, who is the keynote speaker for today. Professor Kim is the professor in public diplomacy at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. And he also used to be the director of public diplomacy at the Korea Foundation in Korea from 2008 to 2013. Professor Kim is a very, very widely published man, and among his recent works in English, it includes Seeking Recognition in Anarchy, an identity approach to public diplomacy, and a status identity approach to middle power public diplomacy. So identity, soft power, I think, have a very, very strong link, and therefore we are so pleased to have Professor Kim as our keynote speaker, and I hope the technology is working. Professor Kim, the floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. I am Professor Taehwan Kim at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. I'm so pleased to join you via online for the seminar on South Korea's soft power and its foreign policies in the ASEAN region. It is my great pleasure indeed to have an opportunity to share my thoughts on public diplomacy and soft power with you. I've actually brought up 3 questions today, as you could see on the screen. My first question, why public diplomacy matters in this year of resurgent great power competition. The great power competition is indeed back in the lexicon of world politics. Major powers are vying for influence over place and spaces, striving at the same time to take a lead in critical technological fields. The return of great power competition that I believe nods to the reality that the United States no longer as influential as it was at the end of the Cold War, when the margin of American hard power preeminence was far more significant than now. At the same time, we are witnessing the growing, intensifying Sino-American rivalry in geographical and functional areas to spill over to the realm of ideational dimension of the international order in the form of values contention and soft power competition. We are thus witnessing the increasingly confrontational bifurcation, or what I would call blockization of values between liberalism centering around the United States and Western Europe on the one hand, and anti-liberalism on China and Russia on the other hand. Each contending party appealing to the global audience, their values embedded in their traditional cultures, embedded in their national identities, is competitively in quest for hearts and minds of foreign publics and in legitimacy in the international society. The values contention, soft power competition, combined with the changing distribution of material capabilities, is rendering the nature of today's great power competition, today's geopolitics, not simply political and geographical, but also more importantly, social, cultural, and civilizational. I mean, this makes today's public diplomacy a central arena of great power competition when we understand public diplomacy as communicative practices toward foreign publics that are revolving around a country's culture, foreign policy, ideas, and values. What should then the roles of public diplomacy of non-great power countries in this era of re-emerging great power competition? Is public diplomacy simply an instrument for advancing a country's parochial national interests, thereby deteriorating the global confrontation and conflict? Are there any means, any ways for non-great power countries to undercut the deepening global confrontation and conflict? This actually leads to my second question. What types of public diplomacy do we need? To address this question, I would like to, first of all, introduce you to two complementary perspectives on public diplomacy. The first one is instrumental perspective, which is a conventional view on public diplomacy, that understand public diplomacy as non-traditional diplomatic practices to inform, persuade, influence, and engage foreign publics, eventually to contribute, advancing a country's national interest and achieving its foreign policy goals. Major powers today are, in fact, actively utilizing public diplomacy as a toolkit for their own geopolitical statecraft. There's another perspective, what I would call identity perspective, that underscores the aspect of public diplomacy as communicative and discursive practices, seeking recognition, a political collective's identity, or some specific elements constituting the identity. A particular focus in this perspective goes on to the process of nurturing intersubjective meanings, namely shared meanings and understandings with others on specific objects, phenomena, issues such as climate change, peace and security, nuclear non-proliferation, as well as identities. By this, public diplomacy in identity perspective is expected to facilitate socially constructing interstate and international relations. Combining these two perspectives, we have four distinctive types of public diplomacy. As you could see on the diagram on screen. The horizontal axis represents a spectrum of instrumental perspective, all the way from information delivery to foreign publics toward relation building with foreign publics. The vertical axis, on the other hand, represent a spectrum of identity perspective, starting all the way from self-centric subjective identity toward transcendent identities. So in realm one, we have monologic public diplomacy, which emphasizes disseminating self-centric information to foreign publics. In realm two, we have dialogic public diplomacy, in which we are concerned more with building relationship with the foreign publics through reciprocal dialogues than on information dissemination. As we go down along the vertical axis, we actually are expanding the perimeters of our identities. So in realm 4, we have transnational public advocacy as in the case of international campaign on pandemic, climate change, and etc. And finally, the realm 4, we have co-constitutive public diplomacy, in which we are prepared to compromise our self-centric subjective identity and more than willing to construct a community on the basis of intersubjective meanings, on the basis of common interests and common identities. Most of the countries, including South Korea, of course, have been preoccupied with self-centric public diplomacy so far. But my argument is that in an era of resurgent great power competition, we need go over and beyond self-centeredness and move into the direction of the realms 3 and 4, i.e. transnational public advocacy and co-constitutive public diplomacy. Finally, my last question is, what is to be done then on the part of non-great power public diplomacy? Let me just briefly sketch out South Korean public diplomacy. Taking the risk of oversimplification, I would designate four features as main notable characteristics of South Korean public diplomacy over the past 2 decades. The first feature is plowing model, by which I mean the wide land of South Korean public diplomacy has been reclaimed, cultivated, and pioneered by the Korean wave since the 1990s. The second feature is competitive rather than comparative advantage model, meaning that South Korea has been relying more on processed, refined, and acquired soft power assets, as in K-pop and K-drama, than on traditional, inherited soft power assets. The third feature is knowledge diplomacy. South Korea has been very active and quite successful, although it's a bit overshadowed by the great success of the Korean wave, in devising and implementing knowledge-based public diplomacy, such as the knowledge sharing program and the development experience exchange program, both of which aimed at sharing South Korean historical experience in economic development with developing countries. The fourth feature is participatory and collaborative public diplomacy. South Korea has been, in conducting public diplomacy programs and policies, South Korea has been underscoring the importance of partnership with, not only with Korean people, but also with foreign governments and foreign publics. South Korea is now moving in the direction of normative public diplomacy based on shared values and in the direction of Type 3 and Type 4 public diplomacy, transnational public advocacy, and co-constitutive public diplomacy. For example, a vision statement of the current South Korean government in the field of public diplomacy reads, South Korea as global pivotal state, contributing to freedom, peace, and prosperity of our own world. What does global pivotal state mean here? That I believe it does have at least triple identity meanings. By the way, this is my own personal view, not representing South Korean government official view. The first meaning is geopolitical identity, referring to South Korea's critical location in Northeast Asia. The second is status identity, meaning that South Korea as a pivotal middle power country in terms of both hard power and soft power capabilities in international hierarchical ranks. The third is role identity. This, I believe, is the most significant of the triple meanings. South Korean international status is not simply subjective, but it should be objectified through international recognition as South Korea plays specific roles equivalent to its international status, and also at the same time fulfilling the expectation of the international society towards South Korea. The current South Korean government also places a great emphasis on values diplomacy. Diplomacy based on such values as freedom and peace. The value of freedom here, however, should not necessarily be interpreted in the narrow frame of Western liberalism. Rather, it should be located in a more fundamental shared value framework of human security. Namely, freedom from fear, freedom from want, and the right to live in dignity. At this critical juncture, amidst great power competition, the values contention, the soft power competition in particular, I believe it's crucial for non-great power countries like us, South Korea, Singapore, and Southeast Asian countries to gather together, to coalesce together, upholding shared values, to strike a balance of soft power against the binary confrontation between liberalism and anti-liberalism. This is the reason why I believe it's now high time for us to think together seriously about the notion of collective soft power as opposed to self-centric individual soft power, firmly anchored on such shared values as freedom and peace, on the meanings of which we could reach an agreement to engage in collaborative collective actions and conduct collaborative public diplomacy programs and policies. Thank you very much for your listening. I wish I could be present in person there. I wish a great success with today's seminar. Thank you very much again.
Today, the first session is Assessing Korea's Soft Power in ASEAN Countries. And as our first speaker, we have Mr. Tran Xuan Hui. I'm not so sure whether I pronounce the name right, but he is at the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. He's studying Korea's diplomacy over the last 3 decades, but he has also lived in Korea, and there he was in charge of the exchange, the cultural exchange between Vietnam and Korea. And so he is a real expert on the soft power as well as on diplomacy. Dr. Tran, please.
Good morning, Professor Hofman, ladies and gentlemen. I try to make my presentation short and focused. As Professor Hofman said, we try to understand soft power in diplomacy. So my presentation will about Korea's soft power in Vietnam and how it works is from the culture come to business and diplomacy. First, I want to introduce briefly about the background of the Vietnam-Korea relations. The contact between two nations can be tracked back to 13th century, and because the distance between Korea and Vietnam, the contact between two countries continue mainly under through the invoice of the two nations through Beijing on a tributary mission to the Ming and Qing Empire. And when the World War II ended in 1945, the two countries again fell within two great power politics. Both Korea and Vietnam was divided in the two parts, the North and the South. And in the middle of the Cold War, as an ally of the US, the Korea participated in Vietnam War on the side of the South of Vietnam. But from the 1980s, despite the memory of the war, the two countries agreed to put historical issues aside and cooperate for the sake of the future. And two sides first agreed to exchange liaison officers, but soon to upgrade to the full diplomatic relation on the December 22 of 1992. So it's already just 30 years now. And through 30-year relation, Korea and Vietnam announced we are now in strategic relationship in 2009 and have been working toward upgrading the relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership very soon, I think in December of this year. And this year we mark the 30th anniversary of the diplomatic relations establishment between Vietnam and Korea, and more than 100 activities, including high-level exchange, festival, workshop, exhibition have been organizing throughout the year to celebrate this event. Just some number to show how far the region have gone. Korea now is the largest foreign investor in Vietnam with a total capital of $74.7 billion US. And Korea now is the third largest trade partner of Vietnam, only after the China and the US, and two-way turnover reaching $78 billion in 2021. And we set a target of $100 billion US in next year in 2023. And while Vietnam is the fourth largest trade partner of South Korea after the China, the US, and Japan. And for the Vietnam is currently the focus of the New Southern Policy and New Southern Policy Plus of Korea in the ASEAN region, with bilateral trade accounting for more than 40% of total turnover between the Korea and ASEAN. One special thing is the locality, the province level of the two countries have signed about 80 MOU covering various areas. And now we have around 200,000 Koreans living in Vietnam, and the same number of Vietnamese working, study, and living in Korea. So why Korea and Vietnam can achieve the impressive number after only 30 years? The reason may lay deep down in the cultural similarity of two nations and handling of Korean way, the specific element of Korea public diplomacy have triggered and accelerated this process since two countries reconnect in early 1990s. So I try to focus on the aim, the goal of the public diplomacy of Korea. Public diplomacy of Korea is the third pillar of Korea's foreign policy after the political and economic affairs. And it not only includes the handling, but handling is an important element of the Korean public policy. And through the website of the Korea MOFA, the aim of the cultural diplomacy is to spread cultural attraction and the elevates national image through cultural assets, and strengthen two-way communication through cultural exchange. So when we see how it works in Vietnam. So the handle in Vietnam, as in other ASEAN countries, include K-drama, K-pop, K-food, language, shopping TV, Korean domestic, Korean style, sport, and dream. And before, when we, one very interesting example is that before, when we think about buying a car, we choose Japanese car. But now, the Hyundai and Kia is the top choice of Vietnam, especially when we buy a car to run around the city. So Handy Vietnam can be divided in 4 steps, but the K-drama in Vietnam is also popular. We have also K-pop in Vietnam. And when the K-pop concert happened in Vietnam, we send, the organizer sends the invitation to VIP in Vietnam to come to the concert. So you can imagine what happening. For the first row, it's not the VIP, but their son, their daughter, and their friend, the doctor's friend. So, and when the son asked to come to Korea for traveling, like Nami Som, Jeju-do, so how can you refuse them to go? So that's the power of the soft power of Korea in Vietnam. And K-food in Vietnam, now when we think about go out for drink, the Korean BBQ is always the first choice. And I want to focus on the case of Park Hang-seo, coach of Vietnam. He is the most successful foreign coach in Vietnam and starts the trend of using Korean coach in Southeast Asia football. And with in Vietnam, the football is the king sport. And Mr. Park Hang-seo has changed the face of the Vietnam national team. Now it comes the top of the ASEAN football team. And from the successful in the sport, he has so become very successful. Yes. And even at his hometown in San Chern County in Kiên Sang province, the Vietnamese now visit his home here, and the painter has decorated the wall of his house with the image of beautiful painting of Korean, Vietnam, and football. And luckily, we don't have only one Park Hang-seo in Vietnam. We have every Korean in Vietnam is the ambassador. And just before I came here, we hosted the farewell party to Ambassador Park No-hwan. He was welcomed by the President of Vietnam and the Foreign Minister. And Ambassador Park No-hwan has 14 years in Vietnam as a career diplomat. And after he retired from the ambassador position, he went back to Vietnam in another role. We have more and more Korean to contribute to the relation between the Vietnam and Korea. And we try to find why we consider the Vietnam is the most successful case of public diplomacy of Korean around the world. And the Korean public diplomacy has created a favorable environment for the enterprise and Korean in Vietnam. The cultural exchange has turned into real business with the number you see above. And the Vietnamese public is believed to have a positive perception of Korea. And we always, when we think about travel, we think about Nami Som, we think about Quang Hoa Minh, we think about shopping in Korea. So the reason is why. And we found that Korea and Vietnam have shared a long history of living and fighting against the invasion from outside. In case of Vietnam, it's China is the past. And with Korea, it's China and Japan in the past. And we share the history of divide and united many times. So from the from the inside, we share very similarity, the feeling of history. And that's why we can put aside the trouble during the Vietnam War aside and to work together. In case of the Korea and Japan, Korea and China, it's not easy to set the historical issue. But Vietnam and Korea can do that, and we overcome that difficulty. And two society are accepting Confucianism as a set of core value is a daily life. And Korea and Vietnam is two among 4 countries that use chopstick every day for meals. And our meals are heavy on dry. So that's why when we live in Korea or Vietnam, the food is the same. And the way of eating is the same, really the same. We have no difficulty in enjoy the daily life. And there's one special thing, I don't know why. When we drink together, Korean and Vietnam, we feel no barrier, no wall between us, even we talk the different language. So I think that's the successful in Vietnam is not easy to copy to another country, I think. And there's one spare thing is that when Vietnam is open the door to the world, and we see and we find the way to develop, and we find the Han River miracle. At that time already, Korea already has become a developed country. So we, I don't say we copy, but we learn from the development part of Korea. And we have the great support from the two governments. And one special thing is the active of Korean enterprise and every Korean in Vietnam. I don't have much time today, but there's one student, lady in Korea, she came to Vietnam and learned about what the Korean soldier had done to Vietnam people during the war. And that's not, she's only a normal Korean, but she feels that that's not fair. So she came back and write an article about the issue. So the Korean society know about that story. But I think we can talk to it later. So there are many reasons for the success of the Korean public diplomacy in Vietnam. But still have some challenges, and the Korean government need to consider how to keep the Korean way moving. We see the up and down of the Cantonese pops, of the Taiwanese idol, even the Hollywood American dream. So how to keep the Korean way moving and to is a competition of other country, and to manage the bad side of the Korean image. You know, the Korean sometimes consider very rude and louding, like Alio, Antweo, they very loud. Even the K-drama, you see a very different image of the Korean, especially when they drink. Yes. So, for conclusion, so I can confirm that by reaching out to the foreign public through the art, the knowledge sharing, media, language, and aid, Korea's public diplomacy has created a favorable image of the Korean around the world, especially in Vietnam. And the Hallyu has spread the Korean food, Korean code, and Korean style everywhere in Vietnam, even to the local level. And it helps Koreans feel comfortable when living and working outside the country in Vietnam. And born by the similarity in history, culture, and the development path, the relations between Korea and Vietnam will be further elevated to comprehensive strategic cooperative partnership this year. And the priority for the cooperation in the coming time is high quality projects that focus on technology transfer and higher added value. That's the agree between the two governments. And the recommendation from outside, the Korean is continuing to promote the cooperation mechanism of mutual benefit and to enhance the mutual trust between Korea and Vietnam. So it seems that Korea is the one to get the bigger benefit in any bilateral relation. So we try to make it more balanced and to make the cultural exchange more two-way, especially people-to-people exchange, and to support and promote multilateral community in Korea. Now in Korea, they have the multi-cultural family. The Korean married with other country, but the support is not enough. And the ASEAN Culture House in Busan, Korean have budget for that. But when they invite the delegation from other country to come for performance, for introduce the culture, the ASEAN country may don't have enough budget to go. And we need the bigger support from Korea. And with a close relation in the field of economic cooperation and cultural exchange, ASEAN hopes that Korean will have a greater political commitment in the region. Sometimes we don't know what Korean really need from ASEAN. And why they choose to focus mainly in the economic only, not the political issue. So that's my short introduction, and we set time for more discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this very clear presentation. And I was struck, of course, by the football coach, Park Hang-sung, because it reminded me that I'm from the Netherlands. It reminds me that most of the Dutch soft power in Korea comes from Guus Hiddink, who used to coach the Korean team and made it very, very successful in the World Championships organized in Korea. A further country with tremendous soft power in this region is Thailand. And I'm very pleased to have here Mr. Seksan Anantasirikiat, who will discuss under the title Attractive and Can Be More Persuasive, a Thai perspective on Korean soft power. Thank you.
Greetings, สวัสดีครับ 안녕하십니까, 여러분. Before I start, I'd like to make a disclaimer that the views expressed here are personal. They do not reflect those of my affiliations. Before I start, I'd like to say thank you to Professor Lam Peng-er and the EAI for your kind invitation. It's my great honor to be here. I think the topic of my presentation shows my argument. Korea soft power is already attractive, but I would say the country can do more to be persuasive. These are the two keywords of the Joseph Nye's conception of soft power: attraction and persuasion. So I'd like to make it briefly. When we talk about Korea's soft power in Thailand, I would accredit Neo-Southern Policy Plus as providing a kind of diplomatic space for further engagements between ASEAN and Korea. Building on it, I think there are several resources that Korea exert to project soft power in Thailand. First, there is clearly K-pop. I think K-pop is really famous for the whole region, and I think we share a similar trend in watching K-series, and then we go to K-shop to buy Korean products or enjoy Korean services. Second, I would say that Korea is very attractive because it's a successful country. It's like a phoenix who started from ashes and then has a very impressive both economic and political development. Third, I would say this is quite special for the case of Thailand, and soft power should be contextualized in terms of each country. And in case of Thailand, we have a kind of strong relationship and strong remembrance of the Korean War, as the country is the first country to send troops to the Korean War. And you can see from the Facebook of the Korean embassy in Thailand that Korean ambassador always serve samgyetang or Korean chicken soup to the Thai veterans in order to repay or show his appreciation to the Korean War veterans' appreciation. But when we talk about soft power, it's not just about resource. We should focus more on results as well. 2 R's, resource and results. Yeah, as I said, first is more consumption of Korean products and services. And the second is a reference. Korea is one of references when we talk about soft power. I would make it clear here that when we talk about soft power in Thailand, it seems that the Thai government and many Thai people think that it's equal to creative economy, which is one interpretation of Joseph Nye's soft power. And currently, Thailand, as you can see from the schedule, Professor Lam mentioned that Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha mentioned about Korea as an example of soft power. So this is what we learn, but we try to make it our own way by focusing on 5F: food, film, fashion, fighting, and festival. And last one, I think this is interesting, social volunteering. I see from the case of the BTS fan club that they gather and then do something good for the community, for the society, as I will show later. I think when we talk about Korea soft power in Thailand, Lisa is not avoidable. Lisa is a good soft power agent. And this is perhaps what we need. I think it's very similar for the case of Mr. Park Hang-seo, that like diaspora or a kind of a Thai who grew up in Korean society or Korean who grew up in Thailand plays a very important role in bridging the two countries. I would count on Lisa's success as ASEAN success, not only Thailand success. It shows to the Korean society that the ASEAN talents are great. I think this is a good example that, hey, please, because if you see the survey by the ASEAN Korea Center, it seems that many Koreans still see ASEAN as developing country, hot region of migrant workers. But I think these people help improve the image of ASEAN. So it's two-way. It's not just one way that Korea aggressive to us, but at the same time, we promote ourselves to the Korean society as well. Lisa herself, she kind of created a good project to repay to her alma mater in Buriram province in the northeastern part of Thailand. She supported for the Coffee Good Halu project by establishing an institute for teaching K-dance and K-singing at her alma mater. So this is a good case. Another good case, as I said, K-pop for good. The Thai BTS fan club, they gather for blood donation. And I heard in some countries, they gather for kind of like going to plants, going to trees. So I think this is a good thing that we learn. On the right side, you see that K-pop can help boost local economy. Cha Jong Hyop's fan club also buy a kind of advertising on the tuk-tuk to just saying that, oh, happy birthday, Cha Jong Hyop, or celebrate his success. So this is a kind of another good boost of local economy. I just found another recent phenomenon. And K-content is so popular in Thailand. On the left side, you will see that the former UK ambassador to Thailand, Mr. Il Khon, he joined with the director of Korean Cultural Center to create event so-called O Jing Re, to like mesmerize O Jing Mo game, Squid Game. But they call it O Jing Re, which means, oh really, in Thailand. So this is a kind of like another good way to promote culture, the good way that the Korean government agencies are trying to make use of the K-content to increase popularity of Korea in Thailand, but in a non-violent manner here. On the right side, you see that this is a Twitter. Thailand ranks second for the countries tweeting most about K-content. And we find some like Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia here in this ranking. So yeah, it's clear that K-pop is now a global phenomenon. I think this statistic is very interesting. It's the first time, I think it's last year, that students who studying Korean language in secondary school precedes the number of students who study Japanese language in Thailand. There is a myth that in Thai society, this is like Japanese market. But now, I think this statistic made clear that now Korea is catching up and is competing with the existing kind of Japanese popularity in the society. This is the project of the Korean Embassy in Bangkok, Digital Public Diplomacy Supporters, which has been proceeding for the third year already. So this is a kind of another good way to build, we call it boundary spanner in public diplomacy term. Boundary spanner like Lisa can help expand the area of understanding from Korea, not only the K-pop or K-content, but also K-policy or any kind of other government issues. So I think this is the way, I think the embassy is going on the right track for this. But at the same time, as I said, it's not one way. The Thai embassy in Seoul also promoting the Thai culture and events in Korea as well. Imagine Thailand, the left one, is the first online Thai festival organized by the embassy in Seoul. And on the right side, you see the Thailand Game Day, which is another big event during the COVID-19. And is a kind of the way to find areas of new cooperation, because we see that, okay, it's not just about you promote yourself, but also at the same time we can work together for promoting or let's say boosting economy together. The embassy also have a project of Cool Thai lecture series for the students studying at Hankuk University of French Studies to promote the Thai culture and Thainess. All right, I would like to conclude here. I think it's about time. I think Korea has a very good start here in the region, but it's about time because soft power is not just finished or can be successful in 1 year or 2 years. It takes time. I think very similar to the case of Japan. But I would like to propose 2 ends for the next step. First is narrative. I think Korea has a good narrative and can be a good example for a successful country in economic and democratic development. And there is a clear evidence to prove this statement. Second, Korea can be an independent middle power that leads from the middle. Compared to other key players in the region, Korea can play more. And the country aspires to play more as a global pivotal state, as President Yoon Suk-yeol announced this phrase as a key policy of the current government. Third, from my personal observation, I would say Korea is a country that always keeps its words. China, Japan, South Korea actually are the 3 countries from the Thai policymakers. When they talk about these 3 countries, they say these 3 countries fulfill their promises. So this is the way to build soft power. It's a part of credibility. Last, Korea can be appropriate partner to work with in the era of strategic competition. I think this is very relevant to what Professor Kim Taehwan said in his presentation, that Korea has comparative advantages compared to other key players. But narrative is not enough. We should have narrators. I would recommend the Korean government to continue and expand digital public policy supporters program by expanding the numbers and the range of domains, the range of participation in the activity. Second, I would recommend the government to establish a nurture network of alumni, network of professionals, and network of experts, because we need a real person who can expand and bridge the relationship between ASEAN and Korea. And the last one, I think is quite bold. As a former recipient of Korea Foundation Scholarship, I would recommend Korea Foundation to open the office in all 10 ASEAN countries. Because I think Korea has a good side of catching up, so this is the easiest way to catch up. Open office of KF in 10 ASEAN countries, and this is what I can speak on behalf of my ASEAN colleagues. Thank you very much. And I hope our Thailand-Korea cooperation goes well in the future. Thank you.
Well, especially that last recommendation is a very good one. But I do think that the Korea Center at the East Asian Institute is a very good substitute for of course, not a perfect substitute, but something in that direction. Thank you so much. As I said, I do always appreciate, especially here in Southeast Asia, also the Thai soft power and the strength of its culture. So that is, it's not a competition with South Korea, but it's a very nice compliment. The next case study is from Malaysia, South Korea's soft power in Malaysia, time to move beyond cultural dimensions. And we have already an old friend of the Korea Center, Dr. Nur Shahada Jamil. She is senior lecturer at the Institute of China Studies, the University of Malaya in Malaysia. Thank you.
A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm Nur Shahada Jamil from Malaysia. But before I begin, please allow me to thank the organizer for flying me over to Singapore and give me the opportunity to speak here today. Today I'll be talking about South Korea soft power in Malaysia. So in the case of Malaysia, just like any part of the region, soft power of South Korea derives mainly from its cultural might, right? And the so-called Korean wave is only not just began to gain momentum internationally, but also within Malaysia itself. But what is this Korean wave all about? Maybe we can take a time capsule and travel back not too long ago, but only 10 years ago. So we can see in 2012, South Korean rapper Psy released his global hit single, Gangnam Style. So it caused sensation globally and also in Malaysia among the young generations. And in 2018, Korean boy band BTS, they have been appointed as the special presidential envoy to the United Nations for future generations and also culture, where their speech has been watched live by over 1 million fans worldwide. And their fans call themselves the army, right? So it's a very good type of soft power we have here. And then in 2020, the South Korean Oscar-winning movie Parasite has also made history by becoming the first ever non-English movie to win the Best Picture award in the Oscar. And just last year, Netflix series Squid Game also gained global sensation despite some of the criticism we have about this gruesome content of the movie. And quite recently, just last month, Korean girl group Blackpink, they also made history by becoming the first ever girl group to top the Global 200 and also the global exclusive, US exclusive charts. So despite all this K-entertainment that we have, we also don't forget about the touristic appeal that South Korea have to offer, where many Southeast Asian population and people choose to travel to Korea for vacation and stuff. And then also other dimensions of these cultural fronts that we have, like K-beauty. You know, we always go to Myeongdong to buy Korean cosmetics, right? And then K-food, we can see more and more Korean restaurant in Malaysia. And then also K-style, the way we dress up, right? And I think, Dr. Lam, I really like your jacket today because you look so stylish and look so K-pop today. Yeah. Yeah, so these are the things. And I think it's very important because this trend is starting to gain more and more acceptance and also attention among younger generation of Malaysians. And this happened actually across different ethnic groups, be it Malay, Indian, or Malaysian Chinese. So this is actually an achievement. And I think it's very important for us to recognize that the success of South Korean have today does not just happen overnight. It actually started since late 1990s, where we can see it's actually a collaboration between a very skillful and very well-funded public-private partnership in South Korea that make all this happen, because they want to manufacture and they want to showcase their cultural product to foreign audiences. And at the same time, they want to enhance Korean image abroad, and also they want to foster better economic growth. And I'm sure that all of us here, we would agree that South Korea has been doing perfectly great in terms of the social cultural dimensions. But what about the economic and also the political realm? What about these two dimensions? In the economic dimension, I think soft power originate from, be it financial aid, it could be trade, it could be investment, it could be something that can ensure that all this goodwill from this initiative could generate certain ideas or values that could be embraced by these benefiting countries. It's not just about money, it's not just about financial transaction per se, but it's actually more about the surrounding halo in the form of reputational boost, right? So in the case of Malaysia, I think China right now, they are doing quite a good job in the economic dimensions, because Beijing is not only the largest trading partner of Malaysia for 13 consecutive years, but they are also the largest foreign investor in Malaysia in terms of the manufacturing sector for 5 consecutive years. And as we all may know, that the Chinese and the Malaysian government, we have also inked quite a lot of projects under the BRI, right? So some of the projects are the very famous ECRL. We have Forest City. We have a few ports, pipelines, and also industrial park projects. And of course, Korean presence can also be felt in Malaysia, and this can be traced back to many years ago. Most visibly in the construction sector, where we have Penang Bridge, we have the Maybank Tower, and we have one of the very famous Petronas Twin Tower built by a Korean company. But we can also witness, or we can also notice that there's actually a pause over a period of time where we don't see this kind of projects anymore. And now at the moment, we can see this kind of mega projects in Malaysia more under the Chinese flag, right? And so these are one thing that we should be thinking about. And we can also witness like how all this economic incentive has turned the Malaysian government to become more accommodative to Chinese requests or Chinese soft power activism. For instance, a good example is that when we talk to people in the government in Malaysia, they would raise their concern about China's influence operation in the country. But because we're so, we cherish our partnership, economic partnership with China so much, we still allow them to establish more and more Confucius Institute in Malaysia, for instance. And what about our South China Sea policy, right? We do adopt a very low-profile South China Sea policy, although we have overlapping claims in the disputed waters with China. And we can see a lot of increasing incursion into our waters, but Putrajaya still choose to downplay the issue because we want to preserve our friendly relationship with China and we don't want to antagonize them. So these are the things, how economic incentives can influence a country's policy. Okay, and just to share with you that the ROK Embassy in Malaysia a few years ago, they did appoint a group of scholars to conduct a research to assess elites' opinion in Southeast Asia regarding how to enhance or develop closer ROK ASEAN connectivity under the NSP. So what happened is that one of the comments by these elites is that NSP is actually lack of signature projects. We don't see signature projects under the NSP initiative. So when we submit our report, and I think South Korea really take our suggestions into considerations, because in recent years we can see that they have been really active in engaging the Malaysian government and also businesses in various fields and also niche area that we have identified. So just a few examples. In January 2021, SK Nexilis, which is part of South Korean giant SK Group, and they are also a leading producer of copper foil for electric vehicle battery cells, they have built their first ever overseas plant in Sabah, Malaysia, right? And the plant is estimated to start operating next year. And then in September 2021, Samsung and Lotte Chemical, they teamed up with the Sarawak Energy and also Sarawak Economic Development Corporation to advance green hydrogen project. And the project is known as H2 Viscous. And in May this year, leading Korean-based semiconductor manufacturer Simtech Holdings, they have set up their first ever Southeast Asian facilities in Batu Kawan, Penang. And just a few months ago, I think in July, the East Coast Economic Region Development Council and the Terengganu State Government, in collaboration with the Malaysian Investment Development Authority, has announced their aim to secure a potential investment worth 5 billion ringgit Malaysia from South Korean leading firms in the field of petrochemical. So there are also plans for new manufacturing plants to be constructed in the state of Terengganu. And so these are some of the examples on how Korean soft power been translated into the economic dimensions. And after this, let's talk about the political realm, right? I think I agree with our colleague just now that South Korean diplomats, they seem a bit unwilling or reluctant to take advantage of their cultural mind and then translate it into the political dimensions. But I think this is understandable because politics are like religions. It can be sensitive. So if we were to divide the process on how we want to advance our soft power, I think the first we can start with culture. And then when the foundation is strong enough, we move forward to economic. And then maybe the last phase, that would be the political dimension, right? Just to sum up, just a very short presentation from me. So to sum up, this year in the Global Soft Power Index, South Korea actually ranked 12, US still number 1, China at the 4th, and then Japan at 5th place. So how they assess this soft power is that The assessment was made through examining a few criteria: global familiarity, reputation, influence, and then pair this with 7 different attractive attributes. So these attributes will include international relations, media and communication, heritage and culture, and etc. So based on this index, we can see that South Korea has been doing pretty well globally, right? But my question is that, how should Korean diplomats or leaders or policymakers take advantage of these very attractive, these remarkable national features and turn it into something else? And another question is that for the next 10 years, are we still, do we still want to still focus on the cultural dimension alone? Or it is now time for us to move forward to the next stage and to go forward, to go beyond cultural dimension? So I think these are the questions that we're pondering upon. And with that, I'll end my short presentation for today. Thank you very much.
Well, that may have been a short presentation, but you raised some very critical questions. And you also pointed out that in a way, what we now see as Korean soft power started really as an economic venture rather than not a diplomatic venture. Not we're going to create soft power for Korea. No, it was we're going to create the next wave of industry. So it was an industrial policy move back in the 90s, but it turned out to be very good for Korea's soft power. You also raised a critical question whether Korea actually uses that soft power or not. And I find that interesting to contrast that we have a presentation on China later on, where China has a very explicit goal to create soft power and to use that. And maybe Korea, in a way, does not do that, and maybe, in the end, may be more effective in doing so. But we hear from the Chinese perspective later on from Prof Li Mingjiang, who is already here. For our next presentation, I'm very pleased to see that we have a perspective from Indonesia. I have strong ties with Indonesia. My wife is from there. The filmmaker that I mentioned. So in that sense, it is. I think I know a little bit the soft power of Korea in Indonesia, but Dr. Aisha Kusuman Somantri of the International Relations Department of University of Indonesia is here to explain to us how soft power in Indonesia works out. Thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the opportunity for me to speak here. It's been an honor, actually, and this topic is very interesting since in Indonesia, soft power of Korea, South Korea particularly, is very prominent, and it became a mainstream topic in the Indonesian society, especially the youth. So, first of all, probably I will try to explore the concept of the soft power itself, which we all know it's the ability to attract and co-opt rather than coercion. However, I think there is actually an intangible aspect of soft power that cannot be measured in our society. So it's very interesting to see that the aspect of soft power is very dependent on the recipient itself. And we cannot actually control the response of the recipient regarding that type of soft power. And we see here there are 3 types of soft power according to NIE. It is culture, political values, and foreign policy. I would say that Indonesia's relations with South Korea is actually pretty good. We built like a bilateral relation since 1973, and it has been 49 years since then. In terms of our products, the product itself is very complementary. So the trade relations between Indonesia and South Korea is fairly good. And we can see that the total trade in 2020 is 18.57 billion US dollar, which is a surplus for Indonesia for $2.3 billion. And we see that the South Korea's investment to Indonesia is worth $8.5 billion, which is the second largest in ASEAN after Vietnam, and the third largest globally. And South Korea is the fourth largest FTA for Indonesia. And we can see that Indonesia actually set a target for the trade relations between South Korea and Indonesia for 30 billion in 2022. However, we do experience some decline in trade because there is a setting and in sensitive and a very sensitive trade product. In 2003 and 2017, there is a decrease in Indonesia's and ROK's trade by 10.34%. However, we see here there is a chance to actually revive those decline since ROK have like its new Southern Policy Plus. And we see that it's a form of public diplomacy, I think, and could be translated as a soft power to engage the Asian country plus India. And we see the establishment of the Presidential Committee on the Southern Policies also demonstrate South Korea's commitment to the southern states in Asia. And actually, it is seen by the Indonesian government to revive the relationship between South Korea and Indonesia. That is why I think it created like political relatability of Indonesia and ROK. And Indonesia is actually conducting a special strategic partnership since 2017. And it has several points in here, which is the first one being defense and foreign relations, the second one being bilateral trade and infrastructure cooperations, the third one is people-to-people exchange, and the fourth one is regional and multilateral cooperations. And we see that both of Indonesia and Korea has like a very strong democratic sense in terms of its politics, and there is a sense of closeness and similarity between Indonesia and Korea in that terms. However, this terms of political cooperation and closeness is only lasted as a top-down cooperation with both states. And it is actually interesting to see how the relations between Indonesia and Korea, even though it has like a special strategic partner since 2017, the trade relations is actually not increasing after that. And we can see that. I think I will explain it to my next slide. However, there's actually a different dimension in Korea's diplomatic approach, which is the cultural approach. And we can see that ROK pop culture is very popular in Indonesia. Currently, in terms of entertainment, there are three forms of popular soft culture in Indonesia, which is K-pop, K-drama, and webtoon. This is quite interesting because webtoon is rarely talked about. However, in Indonesia, we have like 6 million users of Line webtoon itself. And Kakao page, as one of the platforms of webtoon in Indonesia, has reached 2 million users. And Indonesia is one of the biggest market for web comics outside Korea. And we can see that this image that is displayed, actually, Korea is not the only state that has like soft power in Indonesia. We can see that the first one being Hollywood, Bollywood, and Chinese media, Chinese entertainments. However, we can see that along the way, I think the one that is truly consistent in Indonesia, the presence is still only Hollywood. J-pop, it used to be popular in Indonesia, but now it's disappearing. And then Chinese drama, I think, it is actually very interesting because every Indonesian knows who's Boboho. There's actually like a movie regarding like that Shaolin Kung Fu movie that is very popular in Indonesia. But currently, I think the popularity is in decline. And we can see that Korean soft power and Korean entertainment products has this characteristic of relatable, modern, and accessible through technology. You can actually stream it via YouTube. You can actually find it on social media very easily. And you can actually have like that application that actually brings you to watch it in your homes. And you can see that these products are very appealing to grassroots society of Indonesia, especially the young generations. So we can see that this is actually one of the most popular K-drama, which is Attorney Woo. It's actually consistently placing the first place in Netflix Indonesia for the last 3 months. And then it's a webtoon platform called True Beauty, which has like millions of readers in Indonesia, and it's actually very popular. So we can see, I think this is actually similar data, but this is actually not the latest, which shown by my colleague, which was like 2020. But Indonesia as a Korean K-pop culture market is very promising. And we can see that Indonesia is the largest K-pop market globally after South Korea, which has reached like 9.9%. You can see in the diagram above. And we can see that it is still growing. And Korean drama is dominating the entertainment industry. Major streaming platforms such as Netflix and then local streaming platforms in Indonesia such as Video and View is actually trying to rent and provide like as much as Korean drama because they know that it will actually attract like the viewers and subscribers to their platform. And we can see that Korean webtoon platform, as I mentioned before, is one of the largest webtoon platforms outside Korea. Actually, the appeal of South Korean entertainment is utilized by many companies in Indonesia and in Korea. I think it opens like the sense of familiarity between Indonesian market and the Korean companies, and they see that as an opportunity because lots of MNCs in Korea, they try to leveraging the popularity of Korean culture to market their products, and they use actually a Korean idol images to actually market their products, whether it's phone or it's cars. And we can see that the rise of Korean goods sales in Indonesia is increasing. I think it's the same with my colleagues' experience in other ASEAN countries. Probably 10 years ago, you will not find any Korean restaurant around Jakarta. Currently, when you go to the malls, it's almost all Korean restaurants. And we can see that it provides us like a good examples on how there are growing demands on Korean products, which is food culture. And there's actually a previous research that states that people who watch Korean drama will tend and more likely to actually sought for Korean food and products because they are interested in that. So indirectly, Korean products, K-pop, it becomes like a marketing product towards the Korean goods. And we can see that in Indonesia, that becomes the case. I think we can see here the pictures. This is Indonesian. This is Indonesian platform for online shopping, and almost all of it using Korean girl band and boy band as their marketing agents, as their brand ambassador. And we can see that it created like lots of interest from like the young generations, especially the one that is following like K-pops and K-dramas. Some people even they put like advertisement in MRT, I think, and people took a picture of it because they actually loved the advertisement. And we can see that the social aspect in Korea's subculture is now embedded in Indonesian daily lives. And we can see that with the prominence of South Korean entertainment, the lifestyle of Indonesian youth has been influenced itself. For example, the fashion style, we usually have a short hair as like a standard in school or in a university. But currently, we see lots of young generations have that Korean style haircut and like Korean style makeup and clothes. And I think the entertainment industry of the Korean itself is opening a door to introduce the high culture of Korea, which is the cultural clothing, the cultural food that has been embedded in the Korean society for centuries. And we can see that the fan of Korean cultures are actually interested in learning the high culture and languages of the Korean. We can see that currently in Indonesia, there are ever-growing interest for the young Indonesian people to learn the Korean language because some of them mentioned they are interested to seeing that because they usually see Korean movies and dramas in the media. And it's quite interesting to see because we conduct a research like earlier this year, and we interview like some of the young generation that is actually joined the Korean fan base and communities across Indonesia, so the Hallyu community across Indonesia. And some of them actually spend around like $200 per month to buy merchandise to support their idol group. And it's quite interesting. So they have like established fan base across Indonesia in several cities. There are several examples on that. For example, NCT and Citizen Yogyakarta, Komunitas Hallyu, Komunitas Cinta Korea, and many more. It's quite interesting to see that it's not only happening in the society in general, but also there are influence on Korean entertainment towards the Indonesian entertainment itself. We can see that Indonesia's local entertainment has also influenced by the Korean wave, which established several Indonesian Korean-style boy band and girl band groups. It's a local group, and actually there are adaptation of Korean drama and movie in Indonesia. Several of them, it is actually on the theater today. Is Miracle in Cell 7. I cry a lot watching that. So there are several products that is actually localized by the Indonesian communities to actually fits and suits their cultural relativity better. And I think in some platforms, especially the Webtoon, Naver is actually opening a local open self-published platform and start creating the local webtoons in Indonesia, and actually created a chance for local creators to post digital comics with Korean influence style. It become one of the subculture because there are a huge number of reader and viewership in Indonesia, and it become like their own business in terms of the digital industry, and it actually created a revolutionized like the comic and digital industry in Indonesia. However, I will say that even though the Korean culture is very, very popular in Indonesia, there are several critics that came up from the general publics, and we see in general that the Korean wave, it somehow became like a cultural export and not a cultural exchange between Korea and many other country community. And we can see that it is actually a one-way interaction. So basically they're providing like a product of Korean entertainment. However, there are no exchanging rate of cultural interaction. So the people-to-people diplomacy in this term is not happening. And we can see that there are some concern regarding incompatibility with local culture. This is regarding to the particularism of the different countries. For example, when we see that the Korean brand ambassador, several months ago, we got like a complaint from like one of the conservative party regarding how the women's clothes is very sexy and open, which has actually become like a very controversy in Indonesia, with some people saying that it is normal, but some conservative parties say that it is actually not compatible with like the local culture in Indonesia. And it is quite interesting because it is very business driven. As my colleague previously said, probably the soft culture of the Korea, it is supported by the government, but it is still business. And we can see that there is a cost and benefit analysis rather than building relations with other country. And we can see that the webtoon industry, the K-pop industry, the K-drama, we can see that it's actually something to generate money. So there are actually like there's actually like a factor that make us thinking that it is still a company that try to generate profit from like the business. And the last one is tendency to be exploitative. This is quite an interesting topic because currently Korea is often outsourcing like their needs to other country. For example, for copywriting or for the terms of in Webtoon, we hire an illustrator. But sometimes and somehow the rate between like the industry in Korea and the wage they pay in Korea and in other countries, especially in ASEAN countries, is very different. Particularly when we talk about like the Korean itself in industry, we talk about K-pop, we talk about like the entertainment industry in general. There's a tendency to be exploitative towards the person itself inside that industry. So I would like to link this success or like the big impact of Korean wave towards the Indonesian Korea trade in general. When we can see here, there is actually a decline of trade in 2015, in both countries. Sorry, I forget to include like the title of like both of the data. The right one is like Korean export to Indonesia, and the left one, the left one is Indonesian export to Korea. And I think both of the data shows that there is a decline since 2015, but they try to actually amend the decline in 2017 by building special strategic partnership. However, the number itself is not increasing by 2020. I think it is due to the pandemics. However, we can see that even though there's trade relations, this is actually the total product and export of Indonesia. We can see that the entertainment industry does not translate to the overall trade of both countries. So we can see, I think my colleague, Dr. Shahada, has said that there is actually a lack of implementation of like the political and economic side of the soft power of Korea, and how like both states is utilizing them to actually increase the trade. We can see that from the composition of trade commodities from both countries. We can see that export from South Korea is still focused on energy, electrical machinery, iron and steel, which is extractive industry, and plastic and the articles thereof. And from Indonesia, we focus on mineral fuel, mineral oils, iron and steel, so extractive industry as well, and many more. But actually, when we see here, the entertainment industry does not include in here. So it does not translate into like the trade community between both states. So I will try to conclude my presentation by saying that the soft power in Korea is actually conducted both through a top-down approach, which is politics and foreign policy, and grassroots society. And we can see that pop culture particularly has gained popularity and started to become like a mainstream media, a mainstream lifestyle in Indonesia. However, I think we can still say that there is an intangible nature of soft power, and there's little effects of the soft power, the strong soft power effect of South Korea in state level relations. But South Korea itself has gained public sympathy that could create a positive image, political support, and market demand that could benefit their future agenda. But again, I think it would impose a questions regarding how both Korea and Indonesia will utilize this soft power to become more beneficial for both countries. I think that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, that was a very interesting and thorough discussion. I do wonder, though, whether your charge on exports is just focused on goods rather than services, because most of it would be booked under services. I think that's why they don't appear. Yeah. The second is that actually, because of the constructions of these IP payment flows, you actually see a lot of exports to the United States, because that's where Netflix is, and then it goes to Indonesia. But it's an interesting theme, and it's important to figure that out. Third, I mean, the way my wife explains it to me is that the Koreans are so far ahead because in entertainment is because they translate global themes very well into Asian sensitivities and Asian stories and Asian sensitivities. And that is, Hollywood used to be great at that, maybe less so now, but Korea has studied this. I find that a very interesting aspect for diplomacy, because you have the global themes, the global issues. Korea seems to have a very good tendency of actually being able to translate that to something that is very relatable for Asians. So once they use that soft power in the diplomacy, I think they can go very far. This is speculation, but I do think that that is, if you want, a common theme between the cultural power that Korea obviously has and translating that into diplomatic soft power. The final presentation for today is from my own colleague who presents the Singapore case, Dr. Gordon Kang, who is a researcher at the Korea Center at the East Asian Institute. and I hope he's here. Otherwise, I would have said something about Singapore, but I'm not credible.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Gordon Kang. Thank you for coming to the seminar today. So today I'll be presenting on South Korea and soft power in Singapore. So I'll first go through the structure of my presentation. So I'll keep it brief because I understand that we're actually past the time. And as research assistant, I believe it is my duty to be as fast as I can. So firstly, I'll go through basically soft power theory, just so we're on the same page, understanding soft power. And then I'll go through soft power elements in Singapore. And lastly, South Korean soft power's attractiveness in Singapore. And so I included this picture of the calendar of the Korea weeks in Singapore because I felt like this really epitomized, encapsulated South Korean soft power within a month. Because it has all the diversities of the elements that you have, right? You have the Hallyu, Wave Showcase, you have the International Film Festival, and you have the K-Mail Kid Festival as well. But more than that as well, I think it signals the trust and the trust that South Korea has, that it will penetrate through Singaporean society so naturally and be so attractive. And so I think the question is that, oh, I'm so sorry. And so I think the question is that, how do we understand this story, right? What makes South Korean soft power so comprehensive, so compelling, and so irresistible to broader consumption by the public? And what makes South Korea's soft power reach the potential that it has? So if we look at soft power as we understand from Joseph Nye in the liberalist school, so within the neo-liberalist school of international relations theory, scholars wrestle with basically the debate around different types of collective modes of cooperation in a state of anarchy. So basically, Dr. Joseph Nye tries to introduce alternative ways where we can think about power, right? Apart from just hard power. How else can we use soft power to exert influence and basically introduce new ways of cooperation? So we have attractiveness of culture, we have the ability to live up to political values, and we have legitimate foreign policies. So, as we know, hard power, threats of coercion and inducement of payments, and then soft power, the attraction to make others want what you want. So this is all natural, right? It co-opts rather than coerces, the ability to entice and to attract. And so in a recent article just last year where he talked about South Korea's context, he raised that South Korea had a very compelling story to this end. It was interwoven through its economic success, its democratic political values, and the attractiveness of South Korean culture seen through Hallyu. And this is all very familiar to us. So what elements are there in Singapore? So of course, the first one that strikes us is music, right? When we look at K-pop, we enter any shopping mall in Singapore immediately, twice. You can hear it. You can hear BTS, right? And I found an interesting statistic, which is that in the 5 years from Spotify's launch from 2013, 1.7 billion hours of K-pop was played in Singapore. And in 2021, the most streamed groups were BTS. In the top 5, they had BTS, Blackpink, and Twice. And Singapore's most streamed artist, number 1 was BTS. And much of this is because K-pop is not just sonically something that we all appreciate. You know, of course it sounds good, but at the same time, there's the whole globalized element to it. There's a transnational element to it, which in Singapore especially, we connect with because we are a multicultural society, amongst other things. So hosting of concerts and tours in Singapore as well. In 2022, we've already had Super Junior come to Singapore. We've had Idol come to Singapore as well. Hallyu Pop Fest 2018-2019 was touted as one of the largest K-pop festivals in Southeast Asia when it was first initiated. And Singapore also had a K-pop ASEAN Cover Dance Festival in 2014. So you can see I'm not sure if it's large enough, but you can see the kind of lineup which the Hallyu Pop Fest managed to attract. It has a lot of big names. I think I don't listen to a lot of K-pop, but I recognize AOA. So, Actually, and Singaporeans have also been represented in K-pop groups. Most notably, actually, is Scarf. So this was in 2013 to 2014. The two members being Natasha Low and Ferlin Wong. They actually recently released a 10-year anniversary video on YouTube. And as well as Singaporean K-pop online communities, hallyu.sg.net, and also auditioning of talent. YG is hosting talent auditions in Singapore this November. And of course, the next one would be food. Increasing number of Kmarts and Korean food products in local supermarkets. Walking into NTUC, Giant or FairPrice, I think now it's increasingly easy to buy gochujang and kimchi, whenever you want. An increase in Korean restaurants. When I left for university in 2017, I never went to Tanjong Pagar much, but now I go there every week because I eat Korean food all the time now. Bukit Timah as well, which is helpfully close to EAI. And cultural media productions, right? Mukbang especially, because mukbang, it's something which is interesting because when you first watch it, you don't think you really watch a lot of it, and then suddenly you're just sucked into it. Because it's not just about them eating the food, it's about the environments, right? The heritage, the places they go, the ambience of the eateries they're in, and of course the food. And then there's our own Singaporean spin-offs, right? So Xin Yang is one of the most popular mukbang YouTubers in Korea, and we have our own Zermatt Neo, who I should have zoomed in more, but that's him eating 100 plates of sushi in one of the videos. And then, of course, cafe culture in Singapore. This is something which I found quite unique because there was a study done by a NUS student on this, where she found that Dalcom Cafe, when it first opened in Singapore in 2016, it was so popular because it was featured in Descendants of the Sun and in Goblin. So there was a lot of attraction to it. And a study found that a lot of Singaporeans actually went because they wanted to recreate and relive the experience of embedding themselves into what they felt was the closest authentic Korean experience in Singapore. And a desire to relive their personal experiences, or at least reproduce what they saw in K-dramas and in the media. And of course, when we look at TV dramas and film, Winter Sonata in the 2000s, Gong, Jewel in the Palace, Boys Over Flowers, these are things which we all, at least I know I grew up with. Running Man, Infinite Challenge. And these are programs where suddenly MediaCorp didn't seem very fun anymore. We all started to watch Winter Sonata, all these K-dramas, right? And it just started you could feel the air changing. You could feel the things you watch and the things people talk about start to change and started to inculcate a much more Korean element in it. Immersion in terms of the scenery and experiences was something which really strikes the Singaporean tourist gaze when they go to Korea. So when I look through the Korean Statistical Information Service, most satisfying activities surveyed among Singaporean tourists to South Korea. First is shopping. That's not a surprise. But second is appreciation of natural scenery. And then not far off as well, you can see visiting ancient historical sites and visiting filming locations related to K-pop and Hallyu. The Infocom Media Development Authority, excuse the typo, over-the-top video consumer study in 2015 actually showed that entertainment and variety and in drama genre, South Korea was at the top or near the top of the countries of origin for the type of medias. And if we look at NIE's survey, so the National Institute of Education survey in Singapore on local female fandom, they cite reasons of touching storylines, beautiful scenery, etc., trendy fashion and nice music. And this also translates into our tourism trends when we travel to South Korea. In 2019, the highest percentage of respondents showed that perfume and cosmetics was one of the most sought after shopping items. And so moving on to economic engagements, which is the last element of soft power we'll be talking about. So this is kind of intertwined with soft power because it enables, but it also kind of cyclically is enabled by soft power. 8th largest trading partner in 2020, total trade amounting to SGD 44.6 billion. Korea-Singapore FTA entered into force in March 2006, and most recently concluded negotiations on the Korea-Singapore Digital Partnership Agreement in December 2021. Enterprise Singapore actually specifically marks out several areas of cooperation with South Korea for Singaporean businesses, which are all pertinent to the Singaporean economy as well. E-commerce and digitalization, smart cities and industrial parks, renewable energies and offshore wind and hydrogen, which is a major concern for Singapore, and food services and manufacturing as well. And we can see in the top 5 imports from South Korea in 2020. Most of this, as we can see here, don't have anything related to soft power, and it is mostly in terms of hard industry or light industry minerals. So when we look at imports of services from the ROK from 2001 to 2020, or we look at direct investment abroad into ROK as well, we can see largely increasing trends with the dips where you would expect, with economic recessions and like. And number of Singaporean visitors to South Korea by purpose of visit as well has been generally increasing over time. So of course, tourists make the largest group here, and it makes a generally increasing trend over time with a sharp uptick in 2022 after the COVID outbreak. So my last section of my presentation, I think this is particularly interesting to me, because why is it that South Korea's soft power is attractive to Singapore uniquely as compared to the rest of ASEAN or the rest of the world? And I think one thing, so I have several reasons here, right? So firstly, inculcate shared social values. This is something I think is common to both our cultures, which is educational perfection, really trying to strive towards success. And it's something it's a theme that's quite common in K-dramas as well. And this question of Confucianism, it's something that comes up it's a theme that comes up in many studies. It's either that Confucianism is a binding social characteristic, or that it is essentially too convenient a cultural denominator, whether or not Confucianism really has that much of a place in our modern society today. And whether or not this on-screen portrayal is just, a television station's catering to viewers' fantasies, of like a harmonious family, and peace and innocence and all that. And post-colonial perspectives as well, leaning towards solidarity rather than resentment. In some ways, there are lingering anti-colonial sentiments still lurking in hearts of many Southeast Asian people, or at least there's a real desire to rediscover, right? If we don't look at it in a negative way, just positively trying to rediscover our roots. And towards this end, the Korean wave benefits from evoking these themes of sympathy and hope in relating to its tragic colonial history, and tapping into the intensity of the Korean emotive culture and the non-threatening nature of its people in modernity. And so the political conflicts and the social cultural tensions have been largely used to good effect to create very powerful contents. And it fills that lack, in Singaporean society, because I think especially in 2020, in our generation right now, many of the younger Singaporeans, the youth feel that, and it's kind of related to internal AI discussion we had about Tang Ping as well, right? About whether or not how do Singaporean youth approach the future, right? And it feels as if there's a certain lack in purpose of life. Is it just continuously working and changing to a new job, etc.? And in many ways, I think this is filled by something as emotionally powerful as something that the Korean wave offers when it taps so powerfully to their past. So this is perhaps related to their Han, which is the capacity to relate to the emotionally intense past, and oppression and deep-seated grief. So generally, in the second point, generally balanced between traditional and modern themes. So Korean media is quite contrasted with Western themes, which can be risk at times, although this is also starting to change if we just look at Squid Game, for example. And Korean dramas in particular tend to focus on popular appeal, everyday feel-good themes, and a focus on storylines rather than social political messaging. So this could be in terms of representation of family values, just purity before marriage, or romance, stuff like that, which are not especially controversial. And lastly, I would say is the similarities in economic development paths. Having this similarity allows Singaporeans to essentially access material products which they see. It gives them closer connections. They are able to feel it more intimately, as opposed to just imagining it would be reproduced in media. And so I would say these are aspects which, for South Korea's soft power, naturally would continue to, if led to spontaneously and creatively grow, it will continue to sustain and provide, its influence to Singapore as it has. Thank you very much.
All right, well, that concludes the first session. I'm not going to fully summarize, but I do think we clearly hear a number of themes. First of all, it's evident that the cultural presence in Korea in most Southeast Asian countries is very big and very popular. But also the economic ties are not unimportant, and it varies a little bit from country to country, but one should not forget that these, if you want, were to some extent the start of the cultural ties as well. Very deep appreciation of similarities in cultural values across Asia. I wouldn't want to call it Confucianism, because there's not too many Confucians in Indonesia, I think, but nevertheless it appeals. That value system is quite strong in some form or another in Asia. That has its issues as well. Confucianism is to some extent has some rigidities and some opinions with regard to the place in society that may not be as palatable, but that's why it's maybe a modern version of Confucianism that does appeal to many of the countries But Korea is also a huge developmental success story, which I think is also important for a lot of countries, including China. Frankly, China does look with some envy to Korea on the achievements that the Koreans have achieved in a context of adversity. China has seen a lot of adversity in its fairly recent history, but so has Korea, and they've overcome it, and they become very, very successful. And I think that is a very important element of Korea's soft power in the region as well, because a lot of countries are still developing countries, and they're looking for role models that are not necessarily Western or not necessarily very state-driven, such as China. So I think that is also a very important part of the appeal. Still, the question is how much of that appeal is being used in diplomacy. But for that, we'll have the next sessions to answer that. Thank you very much.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. So we now come to the session 2. My name is Chen Gang, Assistant Director and Senior Fellow at the East Asian Institute, NUS. So this session actually is not really about South Korea, soft power anymore. It's more about other major powers, soft power strategy in this region. So we have the United States, China, and Japan's soft power topic in this session. The world's number 1, number 2, and number 3 national economies in the world. Yeah, so I think this session definitely will be very interesting. I also enjoyed the first session very much. But I do realize that actually for most panelists in the first session, actually most of them emphasize on the culture side of the soft power. But according to Joseph Nye, actually there are at least 3 elements for the soft power. Culture is just one of them. The other 2 are the political values as well as foreign policies. So I do hope in this panel, I think our 3 panelists will have more discussion about those topics. So we have three distinguished speakers in this panel. I'm very familiar with all of them. They have been my friends for many, many years. Our first speaker is Dr. Ryan Clark. He's also my colleague at the East Asian Institute. Whenever I look at him, usually I think about hard power rather than soft power. It's because actually I mean not their appearance, but actually the topic you have studied, like, and also your diversified working experience, like security issues, investment bank, strategic geopolitics. So Dr. Clark, actually, he got his PhD from University of Cambridge. And as I said, he had very diversified working experience, which helped his research a lot. So I'm very looking forward to Dr. Clark's speech on American hard and soft power divergence. So it's a bit philosophical. He will talk both about the positive and the negative side of the American soft power in Southeast Asia. So Ryan, please.
Thanks, everyone. So I know we're a little bit somewhat behind schedule, so I'll try to be as brief as I can and leave some more room for discussion at the end. So, as noted, the title of my presentation today is American Hard and Soft Power Divergence, Simultaneous Acceleration and Degradation, and Implications for Southeast Asia. It sounds a bit counterintuitive, but I hope at the end of it, it makes some sense. Let's move. This way. The U.S. traditionally, just as a bit of background, I'm originally from the U.S. I've been in Singapore for 15 years. I've been in the Asia Pacific for almost 20, but I was born and raised in the U.S. And one of the things that I've noticed is the U.S. has had some traditional cultural magnets. I think is probably the best way to describe it. But while they're currently arguably in a waning phase, the U.S. does have some soft power components that remain salient in Southeast Asia. For example, American higher education, specifically Ivy League, Stanford, Caltech, et cetera. There's still a lot of interest. There's a lot of there's a lot of parents who aspire to send their kids there. There's professional sports, specifically the NBA. The NBA has been a fairly successful story in this part of the world. We've had Hollywood has traditionally been a major magnet, although it is declining for a whole range of reasons. I think some of our other colleagues have mentioned this before. Music and pop culture, again, declining. The American signaling, and I use that word advisedly, on human rights, representative constitutional governance, and rule of law. American market access for exporters, including real estate investment. The U.S. has been a very attractive destination for Asian capital flows, specifically Southeast Asian capital flows into this sector, and also the U.S. has been up until fairly recently, a very robust export market. The American image as a power balancer and as a maintainer of order without its own territorial ambitions. And I think, as Gordon had mentioned earlier, given the recent history pertaining to the colonial experience, I think that has traditionally had some merit. And it has helped differentiate the U.S. from countries that have a different type of historical experience and different type of mode of interaction, I think is probably the best way to put it. However, it's not all, at the moment, current state, it's not necessarily all smooth sailing. So American higher education, we've seen rapidly escalating tuition rates for really no apparent reason. We have seen increased wokeness on campus, which does not resonate with most of the U.S. itself, but it especially doesn't resonate with Asian values as they're broadly defined. You've seen accelerating violent crime rates in and around elite American universities in urban settings, University of Chicago, for example. It also basically that helps to take some of the shine off of going to some of these places. Hollywood is producing fewer family-friendly shows and films with storylines that run counter to Southeast Asian sensitivities, the risk of stating the obvious. Music and pop culture, same thing. They're pushing themes that do not resonate with the majority of people in the Southeast Asian region, whether that's Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, it's across the board. And then American import tariff regimes, domestic inflationary pressure that are exported to Southeast Asia remain a challenge, especially in the case of Singapore or other countries in Southeast Asia who have their currencies pegged to the US dollar. So when you're pegged to the US dollar, you end up importing American inflation wholesale. And then, again, rising violent crime rates, riots, and a poorly managed border do damage the American image. I have quite a few friends who sometimes cannot believe that the current situation is what it is. It's something which is, it's a challenge, and there's no point in sugarcoating that. However, there may be what I've observed over the past several years is that something counterintuitive and it has surprised me in a lot of ways is that you're seeing soft power degradation at home, but potentially you're looking also at hard power acceleration in Southeast Asia, which is quite interesting to watch. So despite a lot of the public statements and rhetoric, the Biden team has actually maintained many of the Trump-era strategic policies. So American-led freedom of navigation exercises in and around the South China Sea have remained constant. We've seen American-led transits of the Taiwan Strait to demonstrate that these are international waters. American-led military exercises such as RIMPAC and bilateral exercises remain constant. And American forces have also begun to jointly train in Indonesia, which is quite interesting. What it looks like increasingly on the military front, the US Air Force and the US Navy their aircraft carriers are continuing to confront PLA aircraft, which has risks involved. I think we can discuss that more in detail. But the Pelosi visit to Taiwan, it did have a very, in my humble opinion, an unclear strategic purpose, but it did fully mobilize the US military to secure that visit. So it's one of the side effects, if you will. So I think one of the themes is that keeping in line with the divergence between, or the degradation of American soft power components and the acceleration of American hard power components, this may be a little bit of a funny way to word it, but movies and even Harvard are optional, but food and energy imports are not. So when you have difficult times or challenging strategic circumstances like those we face in this part of the world, a lot of the more frivolous or trivial considerations sometimes tend to fall by the wayside quite quickly. And so I would argue and we can talk about specific data points that I've used to come to this conclusion, but recent domestic developments in the US itself and strategic dynamics in Southeast Asia appear to demonstrate that hard and soft power do not necessarily rise and fall together, which I found very interesting to kind of connect the dots on. In 2022, it appears that American hard power and soft power have actually diverged and moved in opposite directions in the Southeast Asian context. So I had just a fictional quote. I don't like their new movies and music so much, but their Navy does a good job and we don't have to worry about them claiming territory, for example. America will continue to secure key sea lanes, international airspace, and provide 911 or style emergency response capability in the region, including for natural disasters, typhoons. We all know what happens in the Pacific Ring of Fire. And another irony, the US exports food price inflation, but then at the same time helps to secure food and energy supplies in the region. So it's an interesting counterintuitive example. Can we go to the next slide, please? Then the question is, can American hard and soft power diverge indefinitely? Can this continue? The US is not, as a purely historical point, the US has not decisively won a conventional military conflict since World War II. And the withdrawal from Afghanistan was poorly conceived and executed, to state the obvious. American military interventions in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Vietnam, and even Korea have almost uniformly been characterized by poorly articulated strategic end states and tactical plans to achieve those ends. It's a nice way of saying there wasn't much of a plan and execution wasn't so great. So at the end of the day, none of these wars really penciled out. This has given rise to the perception that post-World War II American leaders do not have the same vision and wherewithal as their World War II era predecessors. And it would therefore be expected to see key Southeast Asian countries seeking to diversify their options. However, this does not actually appear to be happening at scale. And I think just in terms of what the U.S. defense or strategic footprint is likely to continue to look like over time, I think the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Navy are going to be the two primary branches as opposed to the U.S. Army. And strategic deterrence that comes from the U.S. military presence is inherently valuable and is proven to be robust despite the decline in soft power. And then, of course, the fairly uninspiring U.S. military track record since the World War II period. So these are very interesting things, because if you think, in terms of theoretical terms, then strategic deterrence and the U.S. military presence here should be highly fragile and be in a declining state, and it's not. And I'd be interested to hear any ideas as to why that is. Okay, James, next slide, please. American staying power despite consistent domestic troubles. American base structures, investments, expatriates, and other tools of both hard and soft power have remained consistent. This is despite riots at home, violent crime spikes, and double-digit inflation, which then gets exported here. America has consistently demonstrated staying power in Southeast Asia, likely because it remains an essentially near monopoly provider of baseline security in coordination with allies. Shared concerns over the trajectory of China and the PLA further solidify this entrenched American hard power position. Hollywood movies can become even worse, but key Southeast Asian states still want the US Navy on patrol in the South China Sea. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ryan. I think you did mention the foreign policy part, like Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. I think it's not only about U.S. foreign policy, it may also related to the political values Pelosi believes, like democracy, freedom of speech. But whether China agrees on that is another issue. So our next speaker is Professor Li Mingjiang from Rajaram School of International Studies, Nanyang Technological University. I think Professor Li is a real expert on soft power, because I recall that back in 2007, one of my first academic conferences I attended in Singapore was a soft power conference held by Professor Li Mingjiang. And later on, we had a book on that, edited book. Yeah, I think it was widely cited, with the title on China's soft power. Yeah. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Professor Li.
Well, thank you very much, Chen Gang. You mentioned in your introduction Ryan Clark. You looked at him and you thought of hard power. So when you look at me, what do you think of me? Yeah. Okay. All right. Very good morning, colleagues and friends. Let me just take it out. Yeah. Okay. Thanks to good friends, Penger, and other organizers of this event. I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to share a few thoughts on this particular topic, Chinese soft power in Southeast Asia. Now, before I talk about China's soft power approach and the consequences in Southeast Asia, let me make a few very brief comments about the concept and the conceptualization of soft power. And we all know what Joseph Nye has said, other leading scholars of power have said, right? And apparently there's a traditional popular approach in the study of soft power. Many people would tend to believe that soft power comes from the nature of certain power sources, culture, values, institutions, etc., etc. And Chen Gang emphasized the point of foreign policy, and Ryan also used that, applied that in his presentation. I fully agree. We should really focus more on soft power. So essentially, the question is, what really produces attraction? What really helps build your persuasive power, right? And then the question I always raise is does soft power really comes from the nature of various sources of power, your capabilities, or it has to be nurtured? I use a sort of like contrast to make the arguments, and I'm a firm believer that soft power has to be nurtured. It all comes from the way through which you use your power in the interactions with the foreign country, in your relations with the foreign country. Culture does not have to be source of soft power. Culture can lead to displeasure and even can motivate violence, as we know. And military power doesn't have to be primarily source of hard power. And military power can produce attraction and help you build persuasion as well. Economic power, likewise, it can be used for punishment. It can be used as a source for the provision of welfare and benefits to people in other countries. So my conclusion on this is there's really no intrinsic nature of any power element that can be regarded as soft power. It's all about nurture. Now, I'm not saying that culture doesn't matter. It matters. It's just one. But again, even when we talk about culture, you have to look at the way how you promote your cultural traditions and norms, etc. Right? And sometimes I always wonder, how you can really establish the correlation, causality between culture and soft power. For instance, we're talking about South Korean soft power in Southeast Asia. Right? A lot of Korean restaurants, a lot of Korean cultural facilities and programs in Southeast Asia. But I ask myself this question, do all these things also help North Korea's soft power in Southeast Asia? Right? The same thing can be said about China versus Taiwan. You have the Confucius Institutes that help promote Chinese language, traditional Chinese culture. Do they also help Taiwan's soft power? Right? So in any case, I think there's a lot of work we still need to do, clarify on some of the conceptual issues when it comes to soft power. But back to the topic I'm supposed to talk about. China's soft power approach in Southeast Asia will include some of these things. Certainly there are a lot of Chinese cultural activities, a lot of educational exchange programs between China and Southeast Asia as well, a lot of Chinese scholarship opportunities that have been provided to students in Southeast Asia. If you look at ideology, political values, it's really a mixed picture. I'm sure we all know this, I'll just skip. And there are other elements, I think these other elements are more important when it comes to our discussion about China's soft power in Southeast Asia. It's about engagement, political, diplomatic, social, educational, cultural, especially I want to emphasize the role that has been played by non-state actors in China in terms of engaging every Southeast Asian country and the society. Participation in regional multilateralism. China's policy towards ASEAN centrality, ASEAN way, etc. I think that's also helpful for China's soft power in the region. And China's policy in the South China dispute, its efforts trying to mitigate some of the security concerns in the Mekong region likewise. Okay. This has been a source of China's soft power as well. Economic statecraft, I'm sure you will understand. Right? We all know how the BRI has really helped generate influence for China and a bit of soft power for China as well in Southeast Asia. Now, in the next few minutes, I will focus on the survey results that we have seen from the ISIS annual reports. And then what I'm going to emphasize as my overall observation is basically 2 points here. One, China over the years or over the past 2 decades has really succeeded in building and expanding its influence in Southeast Asia. Remarkable amount of influence. That's one. Second, this amount of influence does not translate into China's soft power. So I think it would be useful to keep in mind there are differences between these two terms, influence and soft power. Influence does not necessarily mean attraction and persuasion. Okay, in a minute, we'll understand why I'm trying to make these differences. Now look at ISIS 2022 survey reports. Apparently, China is regarded as the most influential strategic and political actor in Southeast Asia. You look at these numbers, right? And you look at the right side, almost 8% or over 8% people in Southeast Asia believe that they're worried about China's political strategic influence. So is Chinese influence soft power? I put a question mark there. And then you look at the economic arena, the same story. Vast majority of people in this region believe that China is the most powerful economic partner. And again, you look at their attitude towards this amount of Chinese economic influence, it's very negative. They're concerned about China's economic influence. Right? And then you look at the level of people's confidence in major powers. Okay? On the left side, it's no confidence, and China ranks #1. You look at level of confidence, China lags far behind Japan, US, and EU. And you look at people's perceptions of the major players' track record of abiding by international rules, of complying with international law. And again, here you see China. It lags far behind US, ASEAN, and EU. But we have two sets, last year's data and this year's data. It's the same story. And you look at how people in Southeast Asia regard the reemergence of China as a major power. And a significant proportion of respondents believe that China's revisionist power. And many of them also believe that certainly China is gradually overtaking the US. But again, you look at all these responses, the picture is not really a very positive one. And then, if you we understand the notion of power, right? Both hard power and soft power is the ability that you can get the other party to do what you want. Now, if you look at the security landscape in the region, Asia Pacific, Indo-Pacific, we've seen two very important developments: the Quad, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, and also the AUKUS. Now, in Southeast Asia, nearly 60% of people agree or strongly agree that the strengthening of the Quad will be constructive for the region. We all know that China is opposed to Quad. So certainly most people in the region are not supportive of China's strategic and security interests. The same thing can be said about AUKUS. This is a new security development, but many, over 36% of people in the region believe that AUKUS will help balance China's growing military power. Okay. And when it comes to a final scenario, you need to choose between US and China. Last year and this year, both sets of data suggest that more people in Southeast Asia will want to choose the US, not China. Okay. We asked people about their concerns about their future relations with China. You will see some of these concerns. Okay. Over 50% of them believe that China's growing economic dominance and political influence in his or her country, in their country, can potentially worsen their positive impression of China. That's the number one concern. And second concern would be China's strong arm tactics in the South China Sea and Mekong. And then nearly 40% also believe that China's use of economic tools and the tourism to punish their country's foreign policy choices will be a concern as well. And what would people in the region expect China to do? Expect their relations with China to be like? Well, they expect China to respect their own country's sovereignty. A large proportion of people have this expectation. And they also expect China to try to make bilateral trade truly mutually beneficial. And then you look at trust and distrust. In terms of trust, both last year and this year, many people rank China far behind Japan, US, and EU. You look at distrust, China is the number one. Okay, and for the sake of time, I'll just skip why people, for those people trust China, what are the reasons why they trust China? For people who do not trust China, what are the reasons why they distrust China? But basically, it's the same story. Now, there has been some slight positive development in China's soft power in Southeast Asia from 2021 to 2020. I suspect COVID-19 and China's vaccine assistance to ASEAN countries may have helped a little bit. Okay. And then let me just conclude. Well, again, I think it's quite obvious from all the data that China over the years has really established a very strong strategic position in Southeast Asia, but its soft power foundation remains weak and uncertain, right? And then logically, right, if China wants to further improve its soft power in the region, it will need to be very careful in terms of how it uses its power in the region, especially in the context of the South China Sea dispute. In the coming years, we'd expect continuation in China's soft power strategy, engagement, a bit of effort to de-escalate the South China Sea dispute, economic statecraft, and those will probably be some of the main foreign policy tools that will come out of Beijing. And I'm not positive about China's soft power. I don't think China will be able to significantly increase the soft power in Southeast Asia, simply because of many, many reasons, and partially, I would say, nationalism in China. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mingjiang, for your thought-provoking and a bit pessimistic assessment of China's soft power in Southeast Asia. I think probably there's a soft power deficit between China's intention and the implementation of the soft power strategy. Yeah. Beijing does want to have to show more soft power in this region, but maybe some of the implementations have some problems. So our final speaker will be Dr. Lam Ping-er, also the founder and the head of the Korean Center and our principal research fellow at the East Asian Institute. He's not only interested in Korea, actually he's a Japan expert by training. He can speak Japanese more fluently than he speaks Korean language. Yeah, so Ping-er, please.
안녕하세요. I only started learning Korean in January this year. I'm so thankful that my friends from the ASEAN countries made it, and also flying in all the way from Oklahoma. That's incredible. And I'm also very pleased that friends from diplomats from the embassy of Vietnam, there was someone from Russia, I'm not sure whether he'll be back again, and my friends from the Japan Creative Center, the director of Japan Creative Center, also my friend from the Japanese embassy. So it's fantastic, no? Yeah, so, konnichiwa. Konnichi, Nihon no soft power ni tsuite happyou itashimasu. Yoroshiku onegaishimasu. So my outline is how does Southeast Asia perceive Japanese soft power? Okay, and why is Japan cool in Southeast Asia, including Singapore? Right? When did it happen? Was it overnight? Or it evolved over decades? When, how, why? And to what extent Japanese soft power can be a reference to Korean soft power? Okay, are they moving along parallel tracks? Or is there some kind of overlap? Can they learn from each other? That's something I would like to discuss. Earlier on, Dr. Liu Minxiang made reference to the ISIS 2022 outlook. Okay, so this is very interesting. In this survey, which Dr. Liu Minxiang mentioned, you see, who do you trust? Which is the most trusted power in Southeast Asia? It's not the United States. Okay, it's not China, but Japan. Okay, so many people will scratch their head. No, why Japan? Okay, so these are top reasons. In the survey, there were actually 6, 7, 8 reasons mentioned. I just mentioned the top 3. Japan is a responsible stakeholder. Tokyo has a political will to provide global leadership. Many people will say, huh? Japan providing global leadership? Okay, but this is the perception survey of the 2,000 top commercial, political, academic, journalistic elites of Southeast Asia. Okay, it's a scientific survey. And of course, this one is like more towards the soft culture dimension, no? Admiration for Japanese civilization and culture. So, and in this survey, notwithstanding the pandemic, the question mark was, which country do you want to visit among Southeast Asians? Okay? So Japan remains the most popular destination to visit, okay, among Southeast Asians, followed by EU and ASEAN member state. So that is that, magnetic, cultural, magnetic attraction. Okay? You have to choose one. Which country would you want to visit? It's Japan. Okay? So that's a puzzle. Okay, why is Japan cool? And it is a puzzle, right? Because the Japanese occupation was very brutal. When the Japanese attacked Singapore, December 1941, my parents lived through the Japanese occupation. The population of Singapore then was 780,000. Now it's 5.6 million. And the first 3 weeks, an estimated between 50 to 70,000 ethnic Chinese living in Singapore were massacred in Singapore. So on per capita, Singapore suffered more than the mainland, even though the Chinese will talk about Nanjing massacre and so on and so forth. Okay? And of course, the Korean Peninsula was basically colonized by Japan. Okay, so in terms of suffering, I can actually say that Singaporeans, or the ancestors of Singaporeans, suffered much more than mainland Chinese and Koreans. Okay, Koreans were like the subjects of the Imperial Japan, of the emperor. Okay, but so the puzzle is, in spite of this historical legacy, why do Singaporeans today have such a benign and such a positive view towards Japan? Okay, that's a puzzle. So, precondition, if Japan did not do this, post-war Japan, pacifistic Japan, didn't do this, then there's no way that Singaporeans and many Southeast Asians will have such a positive view towards Japan. Okay, this is a precondition. What is this precondition? Number one, repudiation of Japanese imperialism, and also to be an economic animal. Okay, in 1974, when then Prime Minister Tanaka visited Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur, and Jakarta, there were violent protests against Tanaka, and the Japanese community and the political community, journalistic community was so shocked. And he said that, look, we have to do something about our relations with Southeast Asia. In Jakarta, they burned the Toyota and they threw it into the canals in Jakarta. It was that bad. But the political class there, they had a political will. They say, let's improve our relations with Southeast Asia. So in 1977, then Prime Minister Fukuda Takeo, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Southeast Asian Division, came out with the 1977 Fukuda Doctrine. I've actually written a book on this. I edited a book with Routledge. So if you're interested, check it out. So what are the 3 conditions? Number 1, reject militarism. Number 2, in Japanese say, kokoro to kokoro no for the eye, means to establish a heart-to-heart relationship. Third, to be supportive of ASEAN. And Japan has maintained its fidelity for half a century, had always been very supportive of ASEAN. And Japan, some people criticize Japan for being a silent power, economic giant, silent power. But Japan had always been a very courteous power towards Southeast Asia. Not pushy like the United States, or threatening like China sometimes, Japan does not bully Southeast Asia. Okay, this is the precondition to have good relations. Okay, the cultural stuff can come later. So, in Japan, Tokyo had actually provided fairly generous official development assistance to many of the poorer Southeast Asian countries. Okay, so I shall not belabor this. What are some of these attractions? Some of these attractions are kind of similar to other countries. Korean cultural attraction, Japanese cultural attraction have certain similarities. Cuisine, okay, J-pop, soap operas, movies, fashion, onsen, anime, manga. Okay, what about Singapore? I already mentioned that. Japan provided some they will not use the word reparations, but some kind of financial assistance to Singapore in 1965, okay? So that's very critical to Singapore's economic development, important for social stability and political stability too. Both countries had buried the hatchet. From 1960s, the Japanese investments in Singapore are very, very critical to Singapore's stability. Okay, what are this, you know? When I was a kid in the 1960s, I grew up with this, no? I watched Pacifist Japan, but Pacifist Japan produced a lot of samurai movies, so I watched samurai movies. I can tell you, Pacifist Japan, in the inner core, there's always a samurai, okay? So I tell my Chinese friends, don't push them too hard, okay? In Japan, this guy is known as Atom Boy. But when you watch in Singapore, it's called Astro Boy. Okay? Astro Boy. And 1960s, go to movies on television, you have that zzz, you know? That is Ultraman. Okay? And this fella, you know, you can recognize him. Say, size matters. It doesn't look impressive, but when you look at the model, Godzilla, you know, can fight with King Kong, right? So, Astro Boy, you know, I actually went to the museum in Osaka, the museum of Tezuka Osamu. And I don't know whether you've taken the Yamanote line platform before at Takandanobaba station. No? There's always a theme from Astro Boy, you know. So the tune goes dum 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 dum. You know, so that is the Astro Boy. You know, so you think I'm zany, I'm crazy. I mean, I grew up with all this. So I'm actually a product of Japanese soft power. In my late age, now, you know, I'm being reincarnated with Korean soft power as well. So I'm a pretty confused guy. Okay, so 1970s, Japan introduced the first modern shopping experience in Singapore. It was a Yaohan, I remember, official opening. You know, the first 10 days, almost 1 million Singaporeans rushed to the Yaohan departmental stores. Okay, so following that, there was a Daimaru, Sogo, Isetan, Takashimaya. And I remember going to Kinokuniya in the 1970s at Plaza, Singapura. And now it is still at the flagship is at Takashima Shopping Center in Orchard Road, and you have a branch at Bukit Station. So Oshin was very interesting when then Prime Minister Nakasone came to Singapore in the 1980s. He said, wow, Oshin is a lady who set up the Yaohan departmental store, okay? So it was so popular, so many households was like tuning into Oshin in the mid-1980s. And in the 1980s, I started working in DBS Bank. There were so few Japanese restaurants, and they were very expensive, serving the Japanese expatriate community. By the 1990s, wow, you see explosion of hundreds and thousands of Japanese restaurants within a decade or so. And Singaporean tourists, what do we like about Japan? Clean, safe, great food, beautiful sceneries, you know, hot springs, onsen, you know, you drink sake, you know. Singaporeans obviously has these images of naked monkeys, you know, bathing in the onsen, you know, voyeurism. So skiing in Hokkaido and Nagano, we have no snow in Singapore, but Singaporeans, I want to ski, you know. And of course, friendly and polite people. So these are contrasts within a generation ago. You know, my parents' generation, when you think about Japan, they shuddered in fear. But within one generation, it had been a transformation that Japan today is regarded as a trustworthy long-term friend. Okay, I know time is short, so I better keep it short. So is Japan, a reference for Korean soft power, or Korean soft power, can do very well on its own, right? No, thank you. It can do very well on its own. So I think for Korean and Japanese soft power, the best thing is just to leave it to the youngsters, to the market. Governments can try to promote it, but there's a limit to what governments can do. Okay? But still, soft power institutions do matter. You notice something about Japan. It has Japan Foundation organizations, Japan Foundation. In almost virtually all Southeast Asian countries except Brunei, right? Jakarta, Phnom Penh, Bangkok, Manila, Hanoi, Kuala Lumpur, Yangon, Vientiane. In the case of Singapore, we do not have a Japan Foundation, but we have the Japan Creative Center, right? Japan Creative Center, yeah. It's a wonderful Japan Creative Center in Orchard Road. So, many people call Korea a middle power. I call Korea an upper middle power. And if Korea wants to project its soft power, a very practical thing is that they should do what my friend from Thailand had suggested earlier. You increase your institutional footprint. Okay? I know this costs money, right? It's easier to say, but where's the money from? Are Korean taxpayers willing to do this? Are Korean members of parliament willing to do this? Okay, so I hope that Republic of Korea can establish Korea foundations throughout Southeast Asia. This is something you can emulate Japan. No shame, because this is not about rivalry. It's like sharing. You have something good, you share with others. Okay. So I hope Seoul can establish a Korea Creative Center. Please talk to that man over there. It's okay, right? I know there are all sorts of issues about I shouldn't go into it, maybe a bit sensitive, but still, I think that's an interesting benchmark. Japan has its Fukuda doctrine towards Southeast Asia since 1977. Korea is Johnny come lately. It was only the Moon Jae-in government which came out with a New Southern Policy Plus. And now you have a Yoon administration. The focus is on Indo-Pacific. So is a New Southern Policy going to be a subset, or there's a big wheel and a little wheel? I have no idea, okay? So I hope that, like in the case of Japan, prime ministers come and go. Even there was a change of ruling party, right? From 2009 to 2012 from the Liberal Democratic Party. But its fidelity towards Southeast Asia, the doctrine remains. So I hope that in the case of Korea, I don't care whether you call it New Southern Policy Plus or New Southern Policy Plus. So long as you maintain the core, have that continuity regardless of whether it's left of center president, right of center president, I never see any centrist presidents in South Korea. So I think that is something which I hope my Korean friends can consider. Maintain a friendly doctrine for mutual interest between Republic of Korea and Southeast Asia. So thank you. Okay, without further ado, may I invite Dr. Yo Sun-ha. She's both a theoretician and a practitioner of Korean public diplomacy. She worked at the Korean Foundation for many, many years, and now she's doing her second PhD, I think, at Oklahoma. So she covered thousands of kilometers just to make it for this event.
Hello, everyone. I'm San Hayao, and I'm from the University of Oklahoma. Thank you so much for having me today, and I'm glad to start the third part of this seminar. Since we are lack of time, I'm gonna start with my second slide. So in 2021, Dr. Nai was invited by an international conference co-hosted by CSIS and the Korea Foundation. And he mentioned that Korea made a big success in terms of soft power. He also noted that we can do more. And I ask you to pay attention to that part, because very specifically, he mentioned what we can do. And I think it provides us a beautiful guideline. So the first suggestion was more investment. And I think it's about investment in human resources and financial resources. Unfortunately, currently, because of the prolonged COVID pandemic, we are not in a good situation to make these kind of investments. But he also gave us a second suggestion, which is about additional efforts. So my presentation is gonna focus on what kind of efforts could be made by the Korean government to enrich its soft power here in Asian region. The first part will be what kind of efforts should be maintained, and the second part will cover what kind of new efforts could be adopted. Yeah. So in 2017, the former president of Korea made a statement, and he mentioned very clearly that ASEAN is one of the special and valued friends of Korea. What does it imply? It implies that we want to build a communal relationship with ASEAN countries. Communal relationship is a contrary concept to exchange relationship. Exchange relationship concerns a give and take relationship. It looks for something to getting back. But communal relationship is totally different. Instead of concerning what comes back, it actually concerns the well-being of the other party. And I asked the new government actually to continue this communal relationship by taking more investment on human resources, because community relationship does not concern the market, but focuses on people. I think that the ASEAN ROK Award for Excellence in Science, Technology, and Innovation is a beautiful example, because it supports the next generation who are developing their ability in technological development. We can expand this example in environmental sustainability as well, and also support those in minorities. Korea announced full support to the End Violence campaign, which concerns the welfare of women and children. And I'm well aware of that a lot of women and girls are in need here in ASEAN countries. Actually, last week, the Jakarta Post reported Korea should not focus on the financial benefits. It actually is in line with what I want to deliver. Let us shift our focus from exchange relationship to communal relationship. And once we decide to adopt this strategy, we have to share that with various actors who built certain ties with ASEAN countries. Because I see a lot of sectors perceive this relationship as exchange relationship, which is not true. 10 years ago, there was a report, it focuses on the market. Still, the press is focusing on the market as well. And the presentations that we heard so far also are in line with that. I'm not saying it's wrong to talk about the market, but as much we cover about exchange relationship, the press should also report the importance of the communal relationship, because that was the starting point of this policy. And let us move on to new strategies. Korea is lucky to build a very positive symbolic relationship with ASEAN countries. These symbolic relationships are mostly built via the media. Therefore, they are artificial. Compared to behavioral relationship, which is built by direct experience, it's less powerful. While the symbolic relationship is very positive, the spectrum of behavioral relationship is from very negative to very positive. And I wish that we can narrow this gap in the future. How? By realizing two-way communication strategies. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is aware of the importance of two-way communication. We can see on the vision that it already states the importance of it. I want to ask how many publics in foreign countries perceive it as two-way. I'm doing a very long project by my own, and this is a part of the result. It shows that we are almost in the stage of point 4, which means we need to do more. Some people doubt to say, yes, Korea takes a two-way communication. More specifically, so far I conducted a survey in Germany, Vietnam, and the United States. And since this seminar focuses on ASEAN countries, let us have a look at Vietnam. It showed the highest evaluation score, and all the mean, median, and mode are in point 4. This explains that the majority of Vietnam publics perceive that the Korean government and the governmental entities conducting public diplomacy projects or programs are taking two-way communication strategies. But still, 15.8% doubt or do not think that it's two-way communication. So something has to be done more. And I look forward that this graph, the shape of this graph, changes in the future like this one. It's been skewed more on the right side. The reason why I'm emphasizing the importance of two-way communication is because the communication can become more ethical. It's hard to be unethical by performing two-way communication. Above that, it produces beautiful outcomes. And this is an example. People start to perceive the quality of relationship more trustful, they show more satisfaction, and they perceive it that the other party is committing to this relationship. Above that, it has been found out, I haven't included here, but it shows that it triggers the intention to show positive support toward Korea and decreases the intention to show negative support towards Korea. So it's worthy to realize two-way communication in the practical field. Above that, we have to note that negative experiences are mostly shared online. And I urge the government to monitor those feedbacks because we have to find out what kind of mistakes we are making. A month ago, I had a very exciting conversation with my director in the lab, and he introduced me this smart system. It monitors all Twitter and Instagram messages, and each dot symbolizes a certain message. If the dot turns red, it means it contains some negative message about the subject. If it's blue, the message is positive. If we develop a program that shows whether the message regarding Korea is positive or negative, it allows us actually to make a next step forward. And I urge the government to take this high-tech technology and merge it with public diplomacy to enhance its soft power. The last effort we could make is expressing endorsement towards ASEAN countries. We are doing that a lot in bilateral meetings, but I wonder how many we are exercising this in multilateral platforms. The Singapore Foreign Minister, he actually expressed directly to the Japan government once it decided to remove South Korea from the trade white list. Instead of doing that, please include ASEAN countries into the white list. It might sound this remark is focusing on ASEAN countries, but actually it's also defended Korea. And I look forward that Korea also takes that kind of steps, because best friends make good times better and the hard times easier. So when I summarize my presentation, let us remember the very beginning was not the market, it was about friendship. Let us invest more on ASEAN publics. And let us share this message with actors who are related with ASEAN entities. Let's make it clear. It's not about economical gain. It's rather about mutual growth. And we can achieve that by taking a two-way communication strategy in practical field. Above of that, if we regularly check the feedback of those who build a direct relationship with Korea, those who visit us for tourism reason, working experience, or exchange programs, then we can find what kind of mistakes we made so far and find also solution to solve them. Above of that, let us show continuous support to ASEAN countries, not only in bilateral platforms, but also in multilateral conferences, because this will allow not only Korea to increase its soft power, but also the soft power of ASEAN countries. And that's the future that I'm looking for. And I believe this approach allows us to achieve the identity diplomacy that Dr. Taehwan is talking about in his keynote speech. That's what I prepared so far for today. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Yeo, for that very positive and inspirational presentation. Next, may I invite Mr. Sean Ho. He's the resident Korean specialist at the RSIS, Nanyang Technological University. He worked as a staff of the Korean embassy in Singapore before, Republic of Korea, not DPRK. And I let you know a secret, okay? He and I share the same Korean language teacher. Okay. Yeah, over to you, Sean.
Thank you, Dr. Lam. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Firstly, thank you to EAI for inviting me to speak at this event, particularly Dr. Lam Peng. I actually have a background on Korean Peninsula issues as well as Korea-ASEAN relations. In the brief time I have, I will talk about three particular subtopics. Firstly, what is soft power in the way I interpret it? Secondly, is it Korean Wave an organically happened movement, or is it a government-supported and pushed movement? And thirdly, perhaps what ASEAN can learn from the Korean Wave. So first and foremost, we have been talking about Korean soft power. I think really soft power is something that people do voluntarily. You know, it's a bit like football actually. You know, people voluntarily wake up in the middle of the night to watch their favorite team. They even pay money to go all the way to the UK or Europe to watch the football match. And through thick and thin, they are loyal to their football team and the stars there. It's just a bit like K-pop fans, you know, they're ups and downs. Sometimes these fans have scandals, you know, but they still support them through thick and thin. And I think in the introduction of this event, there was a quote by Joseph Nye. He talked about how Korea is well endowed with soft power on culture. It really makes me wonder at a deeper level, what is Korean soft power? What is Korean culture? I think fundamentally, people are attracted to it voluntarily. And if you were to ask me, I think it's actually very strong and very sort of penetrated in sort of daily lives of many people as well. In Singapore, I think the speakers have already alluded to this. You know, you go into a mall, you will hear some K-pop music, there are Korean restaurants, you know, in the supermarket, there are increasingly Korean products. Even in terms of the language, how demand Korean language is in Singapore. I think all these are indicators that without a doubt, Korean soft power is strong, it's growing. And in fact, to the extent, there's this term called Korea Boo, Koreaboo. I'm not sure how many people in this crowd have heard of it before. It basically refers to a non-Korean person who is so obsessed with Korean culture, particularly K-pop dramas, and sometimes to the point where they denounce their own citizenship or identity and they pretend or think that they are Korean. This is, of course, extreme case, you know, but there are people like that in the world, although I would advise some degree of moderation in all things. And in general, I would say this whole Korean wave, you know, has been quite remarkable, which brings me to the second part of my presentation, actually, whether the Korean wave came about naturally or was it a government-facilitated, government-pushed effort. I think from what I've heard over the years, and I've been following Korea for 10 over years, it seems like the Korean wave came about quite organically. It was not something that all these government officials, or the president or the minister sat down and said that, okay, let's try to push Korean culture in the world, in ASEAN, etc., and they had like a 10-year, 20-year plan. At least from what I've heard, it's not the case. And it really grew in rather unexpected and very rapid manner, you know. And the other question is that, you know, with the popularity of the Korean wave, has the government kind of stepped in to say that, oh, we want to steer it in a certain direction, we want to intervene? That, of course, I do not know the full story, but I would say that in the creative industry, when it comes to soft power, movies, you know, films, the less government intervention, the less government regulation, the better. Because, you know, governments tend to be quite conservative, right, in general. It's like there's a list of things that, you know, are not allowed or sensitive. And by the time you check all those things, there's really nothing left that is of any interest or significance or of excitement, you know, that, you know, if everything is regulated, then what's so interesting? The whole point about Korean wave or music or movies or dramas is that it constantly tries to push boundaries. It tries to bring teams. I think we talked about how global teams are adjusted to Asian sensitivities. I think that was one of the quotes mentioned by one of the speakers just now, which I think encapsulates this point. But again, with all waves go up and down, right? There are periods where it's doing very well. There are periods where it's a bit, you know, subdued or subsided. The question is how long this Korean wave will last and what happens next. Nobody knows the answer because nobody can really plan or predict what is going to happen in future. But I think while the Korean wave is in existence and it has shown to be very adaptable and evolving to the needs, from what I hear, Korean dramas actually don't film the entire series at one shot. You know, they film a few of the episodes, and the ones closer to the end, they may make some changes to the script, you know, in terms of the ending, depending on how is the public reaction, you know. So depending on the viewer ratings, you know, the film producer will say, okay, maybe we should change the ending to make it a bit more dramatic or a bit more controversial to attract a larger audience, stuff like that. So that again shows the adaptability or the evolution of how this sort of action-reaction wave at the peak and you know, subsiding wave, the Korean wave has shown to be adaptable in that sense. And I think governments, not just the Korean government, but in the case of this context, ASEAN governments, should also try to leverage on this Korean wave to see how we can strengthen diplomatic and economic ties between Korea and also ASEAN and the 10 member states. I would maybe skip this part that I talked about because it's actually quite an easy and difficult job for me as the last speaker. Easy because I think many of the speakers have covered a lot of the ground that I may have included. Difficult because what can I say that is different or add value, right? So I will try. And that comes to the third part of my presentation, which is what ASEAN possibly can learn from the Korean wave to possibly make even an ASEAN wave. I think the key point is quality. You know, people are voluntarily attracted to the Korean wave because they see something very attractive in it, that's something that pulls at their heartstrings, something they can relate to. And of course, it must be good quality because we all want good quality content, right? Be it movies, films, dramas, etc. And I think when it comes to Korean phenomenon, it's interesting because the Netflix wave has kind of sort of accelerated or brought Korean wave to a different height or different level. I've talked to a few people and because they know I'm interested in Korea, right? I follow Korea, right? They will tell me, oh, Sean, you know that actually I watched this Korean drama or Korean film on Netflix for the first time. I never watched any Korean production before, and it's really good. And the way they say it is like they're very surprised, like the quality of the Korean film. I told them it's not surprising. It's been going on for many, many years already, But the fact is that these films, Korean made, are on Netflix. It allows it to reach a wider international English-speaking audience, primarily so. And it's actually a very good example of perhaps how we can internationalize Asian content or ASEAN content for that matter, to leverage on some of these platforms to reach audiences that we would otherwise not necessarily reach. And how to improve Korean soft power? Of course, that's literally $1 billion question. I don't pretend to have the answer, but I think joint productions is a way forward, especially between ASEAN member countries and Korea. Some people in this audience who are familiar with this would probably have heard there is a film called Ajuma, which is the first Singapore and South Korean production. Actually, it's going to premiere this Friday at the Busan International Film Festival. And there's a famous Singaporean actress, her name is Hong Hui Fang, so that's one way where people, when they see their own actors or actresses from their own family, country, it could be Indonesian, it could be Malaysian, Thai, Vietnamese, Indonesian, etc., and they see those films and dramas being filmed in their country, there's a natural sense of excitement or attraction to it, that they will want to watch these as well. So there's another Netflix drama that, called Little Woman. There's a famous Singapore actor called Adrian Pang in it as well. Again, this has created some excitement among audiences that perhaps otherwise wouldn't watch Korean films or dramas. And I think in this context, co-productions between ASEAN member states, filmmakers, production houses, etc., with their Korean counterparts is really a win-win for both sides because the Korean side can reach out more to ASEAN audiences and likewise, ASEAN actors and actresses can become more of a high profile in Korea. Just to share one side story, a few days ago, there was the Korean, Foundation Day reception. And I was talking to somebody who actually follows this Korean wave thing very, very closely. So she told me that actually there is an increasing trend of Thai wave, to the extent where Thai celebrities will go to Korea and they are like Korean fans who welcome these Thai celebrities. So perhaps that also shows increasingly, of course this is anecdotal, we are not doing a scientific survey, or at least I haven't done it, anecdotal evidence of how a two-way exchange between ASEAN countries and Korea, so mutually reinforcing each other. And I think this trend will go forward. So she was basically highlighting to me that, in ASEAN at least, it seems like the Thai soft power, the Thai wave is the one to watch out for. Actually, my main focus is more on security, politics, history. Of course, I follow Korean society, culture with interest. But when it comes to history, actually, one of my favorite all-time Korean films is Taegukgi. I don't know how many people in this audience have heard of it or known of it. 2004, it's actually a wartime action drama film. Chang Dong-gon and Won Bin, two very famous actors that I think probably all Korean people will know. But the point I raise this example is because not many people know, and I think Sik-san, my good friend, alluded to this in his presentation, that Thai troops actually participated and fought in the Korean War. And also Filipino troops fought in the Korean War. A short statistic which I found, more than 7,000 Filipino soldiers served in the Korean War, and more than 3,000 Thai soldiers fought in the Korean War. And of course, there were casualties, 100 plus on both sides. So this is not really known within ASEAN, I would suppose, and I would assume in Korea also probably not a well-known fact. But imagine if there was a co-production between Thailand and Korea or Philippines and Korea talking about the participation, and I'm sure there are many stories, and some of these people, may have left behind some documents, etc. This kind of film, if done well, and I know that the Koreans have a good history and track record of doing well, really promotes the understanding of history, of the sacrifices that soldiers, veterans made. And, fundamentally, of course, you cannot mirror or directly portray the entire story. There will be some parts where are a bit fictional, as with all movies. There must be some creative license. But films are a medium or platform to kind of promote mutual understanding on topics that, not everybody will read a 5,000 word book on, for example, Thai or Filipino soldiers in the Korean War, But when you have a movie, it really reaches out to millions, possibly. So on that note, I know time is short, so I'm going to just finish off with this last point. Whether we can have a ASEAN-Korea wave and also ASEAN-Korea fusion food. I think this point is particularly relevant since we are coming to lunch. Again, Korean food is very popular throughout the world, and also in Singapore and ASEAN. You could also think of examples, for those who are familiar with Singapore food. Nasi lemak with Korean fried chicken. Sounds nice, right? Or Korean barbecue beef with perhaps an ASEAN marinated sauce with some spices and ingredients from this region. Or even a local favorite, ice kacang. And oranges from Jeju are very famous, right? Halabong, the one with the crown, the very cute looking one. Whether we can have an ice kacang with Jeju orange syrup or topping or puree. So I leave you on that appetizing note. Thank you for your kind attention. And again, thank you for inviting me to speak at this event. Thank you.
Thanks to our sponsor, Republic of Korea Embassy in Singapore, for making this possible, and the person whom I work very closely with is Councillor Park Yuri. Yeah, so I would like to thank her, and of course, I'd like to thank our panelists for making it, and I would also like to thank the organizers. Okay, not me, but Mr. Jim Stunt and his team for making this possible.